fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Richard Wolff's Understanding Socialism. This is from the introduction. Socialism is a kind of yearning for a better life than what capitalism permits for most people. Socialist yearnings are as old as capitalism itself because they are its products. Where and when capitalism's problems and failings have accumulated criticism and critics, socialist voices have arisen. And so it is again now. Any serious discussion of socialism must begin by acknowledging socialism's rich diversity. Whatever particular aspect of socialism we choose to analyze, they need to be located within socialism's complexity. That avoids presenting one's own interpretation as if it were the entirety of socialism. In this book, I focus on the economic aspects of socialism, how it differs from capitalism in broad outlines. I'm more interested in socialist critiques of capitalism and their implications about socialist alternatives than in the particulars of the few early experiments in erecting socialist systems, USSR, People's Republic of China, and so on, that history so far offers. Finally, my own education and work constrain me to concentrate on Western Europe and North America. Some important aspects of socialism are thus not covered or discussed here. Yearnings for better lives, such as socialism proposes, are not new. In slave societies, the slaves hoped and dreamed of lives less hard and less out of their own control. Their yearning aimed to obtain freedom. They sought social change that would preclude any one person being the property of another. In feudal societies, the serfs, free in the sense that no one owned them, yearned for better lives too. Their subordination to lords included heavy labor and other burdens that they wanted lifted. They hoped and dreamed of a society in which they would not be bound to the land, the lord of that land, and the feudal dues of labor and subservience. The serfs mobilized in the 1789 French Revolution to demand liberty, equality, and brotherhood. In effect, the serfs had expanded on what the slaves had called freedom. In the American Revolution against British King George III, the revolutionaries were neither slaves nor serfs. They were mostly self-employed farmers, craftspeople, and merchants subject to a foreign feudal kingdom. They wanted liberty as individuals to pursue their dreams without hindrance from feudalism or monarchism, whether foreign or domestic. They added democracy to the goals advanced by the slaves and serfs before them. The different systems of slavery, feudalism, and small-scale self-employment produced masses of people yearning for better lives. Eventually, each of those systems provoked revolutions. Many people then sought to break away from and go beyond those systems. The French and American revolutions marked key moments in the social transformations of major pre-capitalist systems into capitalist ones. By capitalist system, we mean that particular organization of production in which the basic human relation is employer-employee instead of master-slave, lord-serf, or individual self-employment. The revolutionaries who wanted and built capitalism hoped and believed the transition to employer-employee relations of production would bring with them the liberty, equality, brotherhood, and democracy they had yearned for. The revolution's leaders promised to themselves and to the people they led that those goals would be achieved. But the transition to capitalist employer-employee relations that increasingly replaced the previous slave, feudal, and self-employment relations of production had unintended consequences. Capitalism soon proved to be different from what its revolutionaries had hoped. While it enabled some people to be more free and more independent than slaves, serf, or self-employed subjects of monarchies had been, it also seriously limited freedom, independence, and democracy for many. Capitalism betrayed many of the promises made by its advocates. It produced and reproduced great inequalities of income and wealth. Poverty proved to be as endemic as capitalism seemed equally adept at producing and reproducing both wealth and poverty. The capitalist rich used their wealth to shape and control politics and culture. Democratic forms hid very undemocratic content. The cyclical instability attending capitalism constantly threatened and hurt large numbers of people, and so on. Growing numbers of employees within capitalism began to yearn for better lives. They defined those yearnings first in the familiar terms of the earlier French and American revolutions: equality, fraternity, liberty, and democracy. They criticized a capitalism that failed to deliver those to most people and demanded social changes to achieve them. Many people still continue to want a better, softer, friendlier capitalism, where government regulates and intervenes to achieve more of what the French and American revolutionaries had yearned for and promised. They are also often self-defined as socialists. However, capitalism's development provoked another, different perspective that also called itself socialism. In that view, capitalism had not broken from slavery, feudalism, and monarchy nearly as much as its advocates had imagined. Slavery had masters' slaves, feudalism had lords' serfs, and monarchy had king subjects as their key sources of their inequalities, lack of freedom, oppressions, and conflicts. The employer-employee relation of production and capitalism generated parallel problems. Capitalism installed monarchies inside individual workplaces, even as monarchies outside workplaces were rejected. Kings mostly disappeared, but inside workplaces, the owners or their designated boards of directors assumed king-like powers. The book Understanding Socialism by Richard Wolff. So every 5 years, the U.S. Department of Agriculture comes out with new guidelines, and we just put up a video over at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program that talks about how the Trump administration, in this insanely corrupt deal with the $100 billion industry of ultra-processed, high-sugar, high-salt, high-fat foods that is literally killing 700,000 Americans a year, has said, oh, we're going to change the guidelines so that these fast food, high-processed food companies can shovel their stuff into our school lunch programs, into our kids. We're going to change the guidelines so people aren't informed about the importance of, dialing back somewhat on meat and on salt and sugar and all these other things. It's nuts. You can check the whole thing out over at thomhartmann.com. Look for the video for our, the supporters of our program at thomhartmann.com.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, it's First Hour Wednesday. That means it's Middays with Mark. Congressman Mark Pocan on the line with us. He's the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. He represents the 2nd District of the state of Wisconsin in the U.S. House of Representatives. Pocan.house.gov is his website. You can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan. And Congressman Pocan, welcome. And by the way, for our listeners who may just be tuning in, every Wednesday, Congressman Pocan comes on and takes your calls for the hour. The number is 202-808-9925. And we will be picking up your calls for Congressman Pocan. Congressman, I just listened to Bernie Sanders bowing out of the race, but not out of the struggle, talking about how the movement continues and all these, chronicling some of his progress and whatnot. Your thoughts on this? I know that you've been very involved with his campaign.
Yeah, I think all along what's been so unique about the campaign is this has never been about an individual. It's not just about Bernie Sanders, although certainly Bernie has for decades been at the forefront of many progressive issues. But it really was about building a movement, and that's what happened. And when you think of what he ran 4 years ago, the issues we talk about today are the issues that Bernie raised 4 years ago: Medicare for all, dealing with climate change, having the end to the endless wars, dealing with working people in a way that respects working people and not just the corporations and the owners. And I think he accomplished that again this year. But what an election cycle to have to try to run for president in. And the movement exists because of Bernie. We have this great number of people across the country willing and ready to fight for progressive values. And, everything that Bernie said about Medicare for all that, years ago no one seemed to listen to, now everyone realizes if we would have had a system in place like that now, how different the healthcare delivery would be than what we're struggling through right now. So I think, one, a big thank you to Bernie Sanders, a second thank you to everyone who supported Bernie and the movement, and then just a reminder that, this movement is still very much alive. The candidacy may be over. In fact, it was over before Wisconsin. We didn't really have anything happening, for the Wisconsin campaign, and I think this was foreshadowed a little bit by that. But the movement is still very vibrant, very much alive, and very much in the hearts and souls of all the members of the Congressional Progressive Caucus and so many others in the organizations that fight for progressive issues. So, while I'm a little bit melancholy that the campaign did have to end in a way it did because of what's all happened with COVID-19, et cetera, I am still heartened that Bernie put that much time and effort to get this movement to be where it's at.
Yeah, he did a spectacular job, and I think the upshot, you always look for a little ray of sunshine in even amongst the darkest clouds. One of the things that may well come out of this pandemic is that it has exposed the lie, the neoliberal lie, of the spell that America fell under in 1981 with Ronald Reagan being inaugurated, that somehow government can't be a force for good, that government is merely an impediment, that government gets in the way, that government is clumsy and inefficient, and that private charity and pull yourself up by your bootstraps should be the only way that America goes forward. I think that BS narrative that both Democrats and Republicans have bought into for the past 40 years has been shattered here, or 50 years, I guess it would be. No, 40 years.
No question. I mean, I think, people are not so much concerned about their stock portfolio right now, but very much concerned about the imminent health of their family and their friends. And it's not just like getting sick, it's getting sick and potentially dying. And what happens when you don't have a government infrastructure, our shared tax dollars working for us, all of us, why that can fall apart. And it's in many ways fallen apart under Donald Trump. And we can now see governors that are doing it better versus governors that aren't doing it better. And the case has really been made, I think, as you said, for government can do good. I think it also really made the case for why healthcare is a universal healthcare in every industrialized country but the United States. Why that is something we need to get closer to, if not actually get to in the United States. And I think there are other silver linings out of all this. Although I have to be honest, Tom, after yesterday's Wisconsin election, I think we learned a lot of other lessons as well.
Well, I think in 2 weeks you're going to start seeing a number of Wisconsinites, if that's the right word, showing up in the hospital. Yes. In 3 weeks, you're going to see those people going on ventilators. And in about 4 weeks, you're going to see a spike in deaths in Wisconsin. And I lay those right at the feet of Robin Vos and these other fools in the Wisconsin legislature and the conservative members of the Wisconsin Supreme Court and the U.S. Supreme Court. That what happened yesterday was criminal.
Yeah, you just identified the culprits, the legislative leadership that decided it was more important to try to sneak through an election than protect the public in Wisconsin with an election. It was the courts. We had a decision on Friday that had some expanded ways to do absentee ballots, then reversed some of that aspects on Saturday. Special session the governor called on Saturday. The legislature didn't show up, closed out on Sunday. So the governor decided to cancel the election on his own on Monday, which the state Supreme Court overruled. And then the U.S. Supreme Court that night changed even some of the earlier rules around absentee ballots. I mean, this makes the Iowa caucuses look like the most well-run, smooth elections you've ever seen. And then throw on top of it, in the city of Milwaukee, there were 5 polling places for the entire city of Milwaukee, the largest city in Wisconsin. In Waukesha, just outside Milwaukee, which is still about, I think, 80 to 100,000 people, 1 polling place. And we had to have National Guard work at the polling places because we couldn't get poll workers, and people waited in line in Milwaukee up to an hour and 40 minutes towards the end of the day in pouring rain. This is what you get when people decide that they're getting their people elected rather than allowing democracy to happen. And it's the poster child, Tom, right now nationally, why we have to all be fighting for vote by mail for the November election. We don't know what's going to happen by November. There may be therapies in place. There may be nothing stopping the election. But right now we have to prepare for it. And you prepare for it by doing what the state of Oregon does, which is vote by mail. We know it works. There's no reason not to. The president himself has voted by mail. We need to make sure every American has the same right that Donald Trump has.
Yeah, I'm with you. Well, let's pick up some phone calls here. We got a minute and a half to
Sure.
break. Michael in Howe, Michigan. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Thank you. Speaking of Wisconsin's election and voting by mail, you have a whole heap of us sitting at home watching your show or listening to your show. What can we do to get the ball rolling about keeping the post office open and voting by mail?
You know, Michael,
Great
your question, I'm going to answer it specific, and I'm also going to raise it. This is the time more than ever to reach out to your elected officials. All of our offices, we may be operating from individual homes, but we still keep track of every contact that comes in. And right now, you need to say, if you're moving forward with other packages, we absolutely have to make sure the post office is operating. They need the funding. This is ridiculous to try to privatize or do anything else during this time of a crisis. We need to make sure that even though it's not a constitutional right to vote, everyone thinks it is, although I think, Tom, you and I have had that conversation. That's why I have a constitutional amendment to make it a right to vote. But certainly it's the next best thing to a right to vote, which means we have to have a vote by mail so that every single person can be heard in November. This is your time on any issue to contact your elected officials.
Yeah, amen. And the number for Congress is 202-224-3121 or 225-3121. You can call, register your concerns. You know, we want vote by mail this fall, and we want the post office to be strong with both your senators and your member of the House of Representatives. Congressman Mark Pocan is with us for the hour, taking your calls on Middays with Mark here on the Thom
Hartmann Program.
We'll be back with the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, Congressman Mark Pocan, taking your calls right after this. And welcome back. Let's see here. Jim in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Hey, Jim, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Thank you. Good morning. Congressman, I voted yesterday in the primary for Bernie Sanders. Is my vote wasted?
No, Jim. In fact, you know, I did public radio the week. Any communications I had, you know, the whole reason to vote for Bernie, I think, especially as we could see there was an apparent winding down of the campaign, because you saw we had really no campaign in Wisconsin. We had nothing really coming from the national campaign. But it's to vote for all of those things we care about. So the vote for Bernie was a vote for Medicare for all and for a Green New Deal and for raising the minimum wage to $15 and to stopping endless wars and go down the list of things that we've all been fighting for. So no matter what, there's a message that's going to be sent in a must-win state like Wisconsin that if Bernie still gets a decent amount of votes, and I think on a poll that showed he was getting about 30%, we hope that Joe Biden will take up more of those issues, because those are popular issues that will help us win in November. So absolutely not. Your vote wasn't wasted. Your efforts weren't wasted on behalf of Bernie. And now we just have to take that organization that Bernie's built and continue to use it to advocate for those very issues that brought us to the campaign to begin with. So, Jim, thanks for going out yesterday. I mean, you know, I had a hard time deciding how to tell people whether or not they should go vote and risk their health to do it. We were put in a terrible situation, but thank you for doing that, and your vote was not wasted.
Morris in Long Beach, California. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Morning, gentlemen. Congressman, do you believe that we can beat Donald Trump with Mr. Joe Biden at the helm of the ticket and Kamala Harris as the vice presidential nominee? Thank you.
Yeah, Morris, I'll tell you, let me address the first part, and then I'm going to come to the second part real quickly. First part, yes, we can absolutely beat Donald Trump. We are now seeing, even among Trump supporters, 40% people think he's mishandled coronavirus, up 17 points in just a week. And I think now he's continuing to drop because he has terribly mishandled this. And now people can see that it's not just about their stock portfolio, it's about their families' lives and health. So I absolutely feel we can beat him. Secondly, I think let's all think about the vice presidential pick, because it's going to be someone who is going to be literally a heartbeat away from being the next president. I would argue we need a progressive person in there. I think we need a woman in there, my personal opinion. And I think we should be looking at people like Tammy Baldwin from Wisconsin, for example, in a must-win state like Wisconsin. She won her last election by 11 points when the governor and other statewide officials won by 1 point, and she's a diehard progressive. We need to make sure that we've got someone in there who not only is very, very capable of doing the job, but represents those same progressive values that we know will help us get elected in November, because no offense to Joe Biden, but he's not a progressive. And we need to make sure that we're bringing in all the Bernie voters, bringing in all the people who care about these issues, and also have someone who's ready to lead. So we're going to beat Donald Trump, but let's get the best VP we can possibly get.
Amen. It's 20 minutes, or coming up on 20 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Mark Pocan, Congressman Mark Pocan, Representative Pocan is with us for the hour, taking your calls on the issues of the day. We'll be right back with more of your calls for him. You can find his website at Pocan, POCAN.house.gov, and you can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan. Our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at ThomHartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Hey, we have a new video up for our supporters of our program over at ThomHartmann.com. I really enjoy doing these separate from what we're doing on the air, because sometimes I can say things that would be impolitic or inappropriate to say on the air. Like the name of the website that I'm talking about in this video, and I lay it out and share it with you on the video. It's ratbleepingthecourts.com, and the bleeping, of course, is a word that you just can't say on the air that starts with F. And this website is just outing these judges that Donald Trump and the Federalist Society have been sending through Mitch McConnell's Senate like a friggin' assembly line, and how unqualified they are, how hateful they are, how aggressively they've worked to screw students, to deny. Well, one of them actually said that women who are on birth control pills, that should be reason to fire people. Right? I mean, it's just insane. You can check it out over at ThomHartmann.com. Excuse me. Welcome back. Congressman Mark Pocan is with us for the hour, taking your calls. And Kimon in Dayton, Ohio, you are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yeah, I'd like to know why the Progressive Caucus is not saying and doing more about the administration's attack on Venezuela and other South American countries and their people for no good reason.
Yeah, well, Kimon, first of all, many members are. But again, if the mainstream media doesn't say it, you may not know it. But on this and many issues, we were at the forefront of the entire War Powers Act around Yemen, another place that not a lot of people pay attention to. So make sure you have your facts right. I think when you call, just take a look, go to some of the members' web pages and go to our web page, and you can see some of what we're actually putting out there. Follow us on Twitter. But we have been active. Right now, though, I'll be honest, 90% of our efforts are probably on COVID-19 and the response, because we have so very much to do.
Randy in Madison, Wisconsin, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yes, good morning. Yesterday I felt that I was taking part in making history, but unfortunately the history was setting a new benchmark for voter suppression. And as a Wisconsinite, Senator Pocan, the I'm very concerned ever since 2010 that with the election of Scott Walker, that we're a right to work state, and now we have a governor who can't really do much of anything. I'm beginning to feel like we're Mississippi, we're Alabama.
So your question, Randy,
is why does Minnesota have immunity from this kind of backward slide, and how do we stop it in Wisconsin?
Yeah, Randy. So, what's really important is coming up across the country, but especially pertaining to Wisconsin, is redistricting. When we elect the next legislature during the next session, they'll be drawing the new lines. Now, our governor, Governor Evers, has tried to do a public commission to do this, like Iowa and other places where it's very fair. I think we all have to get behind those efforts nationwide so that it's voters electing their elected officials, not the other way around. And as we saw yesterday, certain conservative judges and Republican legislators wanted to do it where they picked which voters were eligible and which voters would have to risk their life to go and vote. And we have to stand up against those folks. The good news is, in the last election, you saw what happened. Tammy Baldwin won by 11 points in a purple state. All of our other statewide elected officials are now Democratic, and they won by 1 point. So we have the votes in Wisconsin, just like Minnesota has the Democratic votes. We have to be able to make sure that we're not so gerrymandered that, like 2 years ago, when 54% of the people voted for a Democrat for the state assembly, we only got 36% of the seats. That's the real problem we have. And I do think also, Randy, people are going to have long memories on what the legislature and the Supreme Court did in Wisconsin. I saw pictures of the Republican speaker doing interviews saying how safe it was to go out and vote while he's wearing full garb, a mask, goggles, a full gown, surgical gown. That was such a ridiculous photo, and I think I've seen so much chatter on that I think they've really been exposed. And I think we have absolute chance if we can control redistricting. Again, not control it to gerrymander on our behalf, but to have true objective citizen panels. We have the voters with us on the issues, and then we can get back to normal in Wisconsin and a lot of other places across the country that are feeling the same pain.
Tony in Perrin, Florida. We got about a minute and a half to the break, Tony. Quick one for Congressman Pocan.
And on this last relief package that they signed in there for where the children are supposed to get $500 and the adults get the $1,200, on the form there it states that any 16 and under get the $500, and then it just sits there and says adults get the $1,200. What about the kids that are 17 years old? What are they classified as?
Yeah, there's a gap, especially on college-age students who are still dependent on their family tax forms, for example, and not represented by the way that was written. I think that's something that will likely be looked at during the next package that we're doing, because that's what the next package will be. It'll be a CARES 2. It'll be some of the fixes that we're seeing right now, for example, with the paycheck protection loans, with the fact that money may run out, et cetera. Absolutely, it is something that it was not done correctly, and that's what happens when you're trying to do something fast. I think right now there's been a lot of thought what's going into the next package, and hopefully these fixes will show up there.
When do you expect that next package to come forward?
End of April is what we're hearing. There may be a mini fix on the money for the loans because it's rolled out poorly. But Speaker Pelosi has indicated end of the month.
Okay, great. Congressman Mark Pocan is with us. It's Middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Congressman Pocan taking your calls for the hour. He's the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. He represents the 2nd District of Wisconsin. His website, pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan.
The Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan after this short break. Stick around. This book in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is All Politics is Local, Why Progressives Must Fight for the States by Megan Winter. And this is from the introduction. On February 2018, 6 days after 17 people were shot and killed at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, Representative Keon McGee, a Democrat from Miami, stood on the floor of the Florida House of Representatives. Looking on from the gallery above were Parkland students who had traveled over 400 miles by bus to Tallahassee with the hope of persuading their state lawmakers to pass gun reforms in Florida. McGee asked the Assembly to vote on a bill that would have banned assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. Representative Carlos Guillermo Smith of Orlando, where a gunman had killed 49 and wounded another 53 people in the Pulse nightclub in 2016, had sponsored the bill, whose chances would expire unless the House bent its usual protocol and acted right at that moment. The shooting at Parkland demands extraordinary action, McGee told the Assembly. He was trying a technical procedural maneuver, one that might have worked in an alternate reality without partisan politics. But everyone who understood what it meant that Republicans held a supermajority in the Florida Assembly knew what would come next. Richard Corcoran, the Republican Speaker of the House, interrupted McGee. A few minutes later, the House voted on a party lines, 71-36, not to consider the assault weapons ban. In the gallery, students began to cry. On Twitter, student leader Emma Gonzalez wrote, "The anger that I feel right now is indescribable." Something unusual was happening. With their eloquence, temerity, and rage, the Parkland students had seized national attention. Major news networks and papers dispatched reporters to cover their calls for change. That week in February, even before knowing that hundreds of thousands of students nationwide would soon walk out of their schools and through the streets, the American public paid attention to what was happening in Tallahassee, Florida. And yet, from another advantage, the scene in the Florida Capitol that day was not at all unusual. In state houses, it is not uncommon to watch someone sit before a panel of elected officials, hold up a placard of a dead child killed by opioids or lack of insurance or a gun, and plead for the passage of a bill that will inevitably not move out of committee because it does not fit within the political calculus of the Assembly's leadership. In those hearing rooms, ordinary people often share in breathtaking impotence. 3 weeks before the Parkland students arrived in Tallahassee, for example, the Florida Senate Judiciary Committee discussed the Rule of Law Adherence Act, which would have required all local government officials, explicitly including employees of the state university system, to turn over information about immigrants to federal immigration officials. The bill was similar to those shopped around the country by the American Legislative Exchange Council, ALEC, an organization that since the 1970s has written experimental conservative state legislation. ALEC's corporate members included GEO Group, the largest provider of detention services for Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, and a major donor to Florida Republicans in Donald Trump's presidential campaign. In 2016, the federal government decided to stop contracting with private prisons because the Department of Justice investigation had found they were unsafe. But after Trump's inauguration in early 2017, GEO Group received $774 million worth of contracts to run federal prisons. On January 30th, 2018, the day that the Florida immigration bill was considered in Tallahassee, so many people showed up that the hearing room reached capacity. Muslim students and Latino farm workers and their teenage children who had traveled hours to testify against the bill were not allowed into the packed room. Expressionless, they watched the proceedings on a television mounted in a hallway as Florida Senator Aaron Bean stood at the podium and said that his bill means criminals will be kept off the streets. The bill did not advance in what counts as a victory, in part because in 2011, immigrant rights groups staged weeks-long protests in Tallahassee to oppose a bill modeled after Arizona's 2010 law that allowed police officers to ask for immigration papers if they suspected someone was undocumented. The Florida legislature didn't pass a new aggressive anti-immigration law until 2019, when it gave the state the power to sue local law enforcement that refused to detain people according to orders from federal immigration officials. The next day, January 31st, Floridians concerned about sea level rise arrived in Tallahassee by the busload to ask their legislators to pass a raft of proactive climate change bills. Many were college students or recent graduates who had grown up along the coast and understood that the window of opportunity for stalling climate change was rapidly closing. During their lifetimes, they told me, their hometowns would be radically altered, if not sunken. By the end of the legislative session that March, None of the bills they wanted were passed, even though just 10 years ago it was all but mandatory for both Democrats and Republicans in Florida to at least make overtures about the need for proactive environmental laws. Similar scenes play out in hearing rooms across the country, usually unrecognized by the American public. Beneath the tumult of the Trump presidency, state lawmakers have largely kept their course. As Alec's own website explained in 2017, quote, state legislatures around the country have made significant progress, passing bills on issues such as immigration, policing, and health care, even as Republicans in Congress and President Trump have struggled to make similar progress at the federal level, end of quote. After decades of state-based coordinated by libertarian and Republican operatives and disinvestment in the states, right-wing politicians have swept control of state houses. All politics is local. Thank you. Coming up in the science revolution is Mad King Trump deciding which states will live and which states will die. Associate Professor of Economics Pavlina Cherneva is here to talk about what would FDR do about COVID-19. The last Democratic governor of Alabama, Don Siegelman, drops by to talk about how prisons are handling the coronavirus and what they should do. In Geeky Science, attorney and regulatory policy advocate with Public Citizen Amit Narang is here, asking why Trump is fighting clean car standards instead of the coronavirus. Check it all out wherever fine podcasts are available. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. It's Middays with Mark. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. He will be leaving us 5 minutes early because he's got to participate in an event or a phone call that hits at the top of the hour. So we will be respectful of that, Congressman. And thank you again for being with us. Karen in Cleveland, Ohio, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yes, hello, Congressman Pocan. I'm still processing all this. To tell you the truth, I feel like this is blackmail via pandemic and what happened in Wisconsin as well. What do you say to us? I'm still, I'm waiting for my ballot in the mail. I feel so crumbled now, as if my vote really doesn't count. Explain to me how Bernie, supporters feel that this is like really worth it, fighting against this corporatocracy that's overtaken our elections.
Well, Karen, really, it's because we were winning on the issues. What we're losing on are some of the political inequalities that are already built in, things like gerrymandering in states like Wisconsin and other states where even when a majority of voters don't want something, they're able to get around that. But the next legislature in every single state that's elected will be doing redistricting, and that's our chance to have a more fair process and be in a much better position for the next 10 years. But on the issues, 4 years ago when Bernie talked about Medicare for all, very, very few people talked about it. This time, I think every candidate at one point talked about it until, in some cases, they thought it was politically expedient to slightly have a different viewpoint. But right now, we have seen the polling showing why people understand why a system like that would make sense. The fact that we absolutely have to deal with climate change, and if we can put all these efforts together to deal with something like COVID-19, there's certainly a way worldwide to do that around climate change. The fact that we need to make sure that we are stopping the endless wars, to make sure that we're raising the minimum wage and helping working families get by. There are so many issues that people support us, usually 60 to 80% on. We just have to make sure we're able to do that in the actual legislative bodies. The way we do that is you vote, you get active, you support candidates, you work against the bad candidates. And I've been doing this for pretty close to 30 years. I've been in local, state, and federal government. When people are the most active and hopefully the most angry and speak out is when we're going to have the biggest impact and changes. And right now, I don't know why anyone wouldn't be as pissed as possible, given where we are. We didn't have to be where we're at right now with COVID-19 if it wasn't for the fact that we had an incompetent president, someone who's more of a reality show star than an actual president of the United States. So, Karen, now more than ever, we need to be as active and active in very different ways. It might be volunteering and calling people from your home, texting people from your home, using social media. It's going to be a little different. but be ready to adapt to those changes. The good news is a lot of those conservative entities will throw money at it, but they don't have the people power, and we do, and that's why we're going to win at the end of the day.
Congressman, very quickly, just clarify for me. My understanding is in the last election, more people voted for Democrats in the state of Wisconsin for the House and Senate than voted for Republicans, yet you have a substantial majority of Republicans in the House and Senate, is in the state House and Senate. Is that accurate?
Yeah, so in 18, just to give you an example, 54% of people voted for a Democrat for the state assembly, and we got 36% of the seats for those 54% of votes. 2016 for Congress, because I was unopposed last time, it skews the numbers for 18. We had in 16, 100,000 more people voted for a Democrat for Congress, and we got 3 of the 8 seats. That's what gerrymandering is, and that's what we have in other states. It's not just Wisconsin.
Yeah, okay. Back to our phone calls. David in Spotswood, New Jersey. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, thank you for taking my call. I voted for Hillary, on Bernie's instruction. I still felt bad. I still feel burned about card check with Obama. He promised to have card check, and then he didn't give it to us. I think I'm going to sit out this time. My question is about the economic injury loan. It covers payroll, but it's not 250% payroll. Am I correct? And also, I wanted to just quickly comment. Thank you for leaving me on the phone. I'm talking to a lot of small business owners, and they're really not thrilled that their employees are getting the $600 federal stimulus. I'd like to know what the congressman is going to do to change attitudes and perceptions. It really burns me. I mean, every small business person
got it,
is
David.
really annoyed that.
Let's let him answer. You're on the air.
Yeah, David. So first of all, I have been a small business owner since I was 23, so 32 years, and a small business and a union shop. So I understand it from a number of perspectives. Let me say this. I think we do need to do more for small businesses. I have even difficulties as I talk to some of my leadership and I see them ignoring some issues that I think are important, because as a small business, when this is done, this immediate period of a month or two that's going to be really, really hard, you're not going to start back up at 100%, and we need to recognize that. So I've been advocating for work share proposals within unemployment insurance, and I'm not getting as far as I'd like to get because I think it'll be important for small businesses to reopen. So we have to do more for small businesses. On the loan I think you're asking about, because there's a few different loans, but the one that everyone's talking about right now is the Paycheck Protection loans. The amount you can get is based on 2.5 times your salary, but it's based on 2 months of your employee's salary. And then the rest of the money is to help a business offset their rent and utilities that they had to encumber during those 2 months. So that's why it's based a little bit higher, so that you can actually use it to help your mortgage or rent, your utilities. But there are still other expenses that small businesses have. And that's why I think many of us are still trying to raise that awareness that more needs to happen for small business. And hopefully that answered your question.
And by the way, sitting out this election is stupid. Let me add that to the caller who said he was going to sit out the election.
Tom, thanks for saying that. I was trying to be a little more polite on it.
I'll just call it. It's just stupid sitting out this election. Anybody who does that is anybody who says that on the air is either a Republican troll or a fool. Jeff in San Francisco, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Well, I understand that his frustration, though, with sitting out, but I'm not going to. But could one of you congressmen stand up and say one little kernel of meat for us and say, I'm going to lead the student loan non-payment of this May or something like that? Say nobody pays their student loans in May. Could some congressman stand up and say, please don't pay that, so we could get $1.5 trillion to pay them off?
Yeah.
Well,
first of all, some of that's happening already, right? You don't have to. They're not going to collect for, I believe, and I don't have it in front of me, so I apologize if I give you the wrong number, but I think it's 6 months of no student loan collection and no interest gaining during that time period whatsoever. And we are also advocating, and many members of Congress are advocating for the cancellation of student debt during this time period. So, I think this goes to probably the most perennial question I get, Tom, on your show and others are, if they don't see it in the mainstream media, and if you watch just the mainstream media, you'd think there's 20 members of Congress because that's the same people they report on and go to. It didn't happen. And in reality, there is a lot of work on this. And also the Congressional Progressive Caucus Center, which is our 501c think tank, has got a major initiative around this as well. So there is a lot of work around this. There actually was relief in the last CARES Act. So there is some good movement on that. I think part of it is we have to make sure that people really know what's all in there, because that way we do have more relief for people who need it available, because, like I said, that is something that was included.
Dariush in Costa Mesa, California. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan. Quick one, please.
Thank you for taking the call, and gentlemen, thank you for standing up for the Democratic voice. I'll make my question quick and listen to your answer off the air. I was wondering why Bernie Sanders did not run on the independent platform. If anything, he's been there for over 4 decades. He knows this establishment and the nature of it. The difference between Democratic, with all due respect, Democratic and Republican, it's difference between Pepsi and the Coke. I'll listen to your answer.
So let's get the answer here. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think, for Bernie Sanders, who is an independent in the U.S. Senate, but obviously there's not many because it's not the best electoral path. And quite honestly, it's happened in smaller states, not bigger states. And I think the reality that most people understand is the two-party system is very prevalent in the United States, and it's easiest to work within that two-party system. That's why he decided to run, I think, for the Democratic nomination as opposed to independent. But also, within the Democratic Party, to say the difference is Coke and Pepsi is an insult to myself and Rokana and Pramila Jayapal and AOC and Ilhan Omar and all the other members, people who fight for the very things we care about. So I hope that people just keep that in mind as they say something as universally as that.
Yeah, if you think it's Coke and Pepsi, take a look at Donald Trump. It's a choice between poison and Coke or Pepsi. Congressman Mark Pocan with us. It's Middays with Mark. We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan in just a moment.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
45 minutes past the hour. We'll try to get through some quick calls here. Congressman Pocan does have to leave 5 minutes early. We'll be back with more of your calls. And welcome back. Josh in Virginia Beach, Virginia. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hey, Congressman Pocan. So I have a question about what our next steps are as Bernie supporters. I know there's a lot of anger right now at the DNC and even at Joe Biden, and there's a lot of, they're wondering, what are our next steps? Would it be general strike or, vote or write Bernie in or just, get out of politics completely? But Bernie did the same. He exposed the establishment in 2016 and told us all we need to elect thousands of progressives to local and state level offices and all other levels of government. And I'm not sure that it's viral of a topic enough, because it seems like a lot of progressives may have forgotten that message. If you look at a lot of the Bernie groups on Facebook and what's being said on Twitter, a lot of the discourse sort of kind of tends to shift away from that message. Unfortunately, how can we make that a viral topic again? How can we make it the winning strategy is focus on electing thousands of progressives?
Yeah, Josh, you answered the question, because the first part, when you started giving some of those suggestions, I'm like, no, wrong answer, wrong answer, wrong answer. But what you just said is exactly right. We have progressives running for Congress, for state legislatures, for county and local elected offices. We need to support those folks, because one of the best ways still to get elected to Congress is to usually have gotten a start from somewhere. That's still, even though AOC, shocked the world by taking out someone in Democratic leadership, and she's been an amazing progressive, that's not the normal path. Ayanna Pressley was in local government in Boston on the city council and got to Congress. Rashida Tlaib was in the state legislature. Ilhan Omar was in the state legislature. So when you talk about Pramila Jayapal in the state legislature, generally that is still a path. So the more I think we can get behind those people who share our values and do it in a positive way. I mean, I'm not happy that the campaign ended. But boy, these are such unique situations right now with the COVID-19 that I don't know what else could have happened differently for Bernie, because this was just a once in 100-year, literally, event I think we're living through right now. But we can take all of those energies and support the same candidates who support the same values, so that we can still enact that change. And maybe next time it won't be Bernie, there'll be another person who's the Bernie, and then we're going to get behind that candidate. But Bernie won on the issues. Those are all now 60, 80% public support issues. Now we just have to get the elected officials elected who will actually listen to the people and do what they're asking, and that is the next step. So thanks for ending your question with that, because that is the exact right thing we need to do.
We have about 45 seconds. Roger, do you have a real quick question, or you want me to come back to you after the break?
Yeah, I was wondering, thank you, Tom, for what you do. It's an honor to talk to you, and thank you, Congressman, for all you do and will do. I want to know, well, I'm a 68-year-old senior. My check goes to the credit union. I've had a bank account. Do I have to make sure that the IRS has my proper identification, or will they use the Social Security information they have for my direct deposit? Thank you. I'll take my answer off the phone.
Yeah, honestly, I that was a lot real quick. I don't know if I have an answer for you. I would say put that.
I'm pretty sure they'll use his Social Security information. So.
Well, your tax information for sure. I know if you have ever filled out a tax, that's where it's going to go, and that's the account that you already have attached to it. But I just don't know based on Social Security. It might be worth asking your member of Congress or the Senate.
Yeah, okay, good one. We'll be back with more of Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour here on Middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program, our national town hall meeting with the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. Stick around, we'll be right back. Hey, did you know that Hillary Clinton actually won Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, North Carolina, and Florida in the 2016 election? It's on page 92 of my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting. We have a special video up. So we've got a new video up for regular supporters of our program over at thomhartmann.com, and this is about just a totally bizarre story about these three guys with no VA experience, not even veterans, who are all big shots down at Mar-a-Lago, that Donald Trump has put in charge of the Veterans Administration functionally. And their association, one of them is the head of Marvel Entertainment, their association with Johnson & Johnson and the New York Stock Exchange, and Johnson & Johnson, the big drug company, taking this very, very cheap chemical, ketamine, tweaking the molecule a little bit, and rolling it out as a new anti-suicide drug, Spravato, that in clinical trials caused 6 people to die, 3 of them by suicide, and none of the people taking the placebo to die. And now Trump is telling the VA, you have to buy this highly inflated price drug from Johnson & Johnson. And the Democrats want to know what's up with the VA crowd guys. Check it out. It's at thomhartmann.com. And Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. Ike in Charleston, South Carolina. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hey, good afternoon, Congressman, Professor. Listen, I've passed this idea on to the Speaker's office and my Representative Clyburn's office, and I thought I'd throw it out for everybody to hear. Being an EBT recipient, I'm pretty well stocked up and have plenty of groceries, but I still have quite a bit of credit left on my card. And I was thinking, it wouldn't be a bad idea if we could loosen the restrictions a little bit. And for those of us that can't really cook that good and are sick and tired of eating what we cook, maybe we could actually use some of this money temporarily to be able to get some stuff from some of these restaurants around here that are starving to death. What do you think?
I think it's a good suggestion. Another thing that I know was brought up by a Progressive Caucus member on a call we had yesterday, and I'm not entirely clear yet if it was resolved in the CARES Act or if it's something we're going to be proposing. But that also is to allow you to be able to use it for the grocery delivery services so that you could still have groceries delivered that maybe you could be helping make sure that you could trade some items or whatever else, but you could still be able to use it in a way that maybe some people can't access it because of the communities they live in right now. So we're working on that. Also, we're trying to find a little boost in SNAP because I think right now more than ever people need it. And I appreciate your suggestion, Ike. And Jim Clyburn is a very, very powerful person. You're a member of Congress, so it's the right person to raise that issue to.
Congressman, it's 8 minutes before the hour. Do you need to run, or shall you take one more call?
I can do one more call. Well, they're going to call at 5:02, so I can do one more call, sure.
Okay, great. Catherine in Las Vegas. Please keep it quick, Catherine. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yes. So about 2 days ago, there was a tweet put out by Barack Obama that a lot of people saw as an endorsement of Elizabeth Warren, saying that her plan is best suited to deal with coronavirus, et cetera. And now that Bernie's dropped out and the primary is essentially over, I was wondering, have there been any conversations with the Progressive Caucus? Because that was kind of seen as a suggestion that Biden select Elizabeth Warren for VP.
Yeah, I can't speak to what Barack Obama meant by it. I can tell you the good news is, as you can imagine, Elizabeth Warren is a complete class act. She has reached out to both Pramila Jayapal and myself already in sharing many of her ideas, and we're helping amplify from the Senate and the House together progressive values. So we have great people like Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders who are all working with us right now, and she has had some really great ideas during this COVID crisis that we've also helped to amplify. So it could just be that she has really awesome ideas, and Barack Obama is recognizing that and trying to make sure that our current leadership sees the value in what she's putting out there. And she has been, again, a total class act, and I'm so happy to work with her and Bernie.
Yeah. Congressman, thanks so much for being with us today. I know you had to run to that phone call, but thank you for being with us.
This is a caucus-wide call with the entire White House Corona task force. So Dr. Fauci, who I'm going to listen to, the vice president, we'll see, but all the rest of the folks are there. It's just an important call, but I appreciate this town hall, and I look forward to next week.
Thank you, Congressman. It's great talking with you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Congressman Mark Pocan, co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. Gregory in Islington, South Carolina. Hey, Gregory, what's on your mind today? Oh, I put Gregory on hybrid 2, Sean. My apologies.
It looks like the ACA is coming up before the Supreme Court, and I hate to say it, but the way they voted yesterday regarding what happened in Madison, I have a feeling that it's going to fall. Do they have a backup plan in the event it falls, or doesn't it take like a year for that to take effect? Maybe if we change presidents, maybe it could stop. I don't know. What do you think?
I think that's the plan, Gregory. If the Supreme Court does what they certainly would be inclined to do, which is go along with Donald Trump and Bill Barr and the 20 Republican governors and attorneys general who are requesting that the entire Affordable Care Act be eliminated, that all protections for pre-existing conditions be eliminated, that 20 million people on Medicare lose their coverage, that 135 million Americans with pre-existing conditions lose their protection. If the Supreme Court goes along with that, it creates a giant vacuum in the way that we pay for health care, and that I think is a perfect opening for Medicare for All, for the Progressive Caucus and members like that to step in. And I hope that we have a Democratic president, in the next year going forward. But frankly, I think even if we don't, Donald Trump is politically no idiot, and my guess is that even he would be advocating Medicare for all. You'll recall he ran for president on the platform that he was going to come up with something better than Obamacare. He never did it. He was lying, as he does about pretty much everything. But I think it's a moment of opportunity, regardless of which direction the Supreme Court goes. Gregory, great question. Thanks for the call, and thanks for listening to us on Progressive Voices. We'll be back with more of our program today. And in our second hour, are we going to get to vote in November? We're going to get into this. In our third hour, Zach Corrigan is here with us with Food and Water Watch.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Hello, I'm Casey Hobbs.
book today is My Life in the Black Party. The title is just another N-word, and it's by Field Marshal Don Cox, his life in the Black Panther Party. This is from Chapter 5, page 47. The chapter is titled, Use What You Got to Get What You Need. Before we entered into a direct relationship with the Panthers, our group had wanted to prove our worthiness by our actions. Since that was no longer in question, contact was made and a rendezvous fixed to meet at Huey's Pad on Telegraph Avenue in Oakland. I don't remember much about that first gathering, other than meeting David Hilliard, the Panther Party's chief of staff, for the first time. The only thing that stands out in my memory is a question from Huey as we were sipping coffee. He asked if I didn't think it better to be properly equipped before going into action. He suggested it was best to first rip off the necessary funds to get everything we needed in advance of launching a major effort. I had practically memorized his essay, The Correct Handling of a Revolution, in which he spoke of teaching by example. And so I blurted out the first thing that came to mind, which was, use what you got to get what you need. After a long, hot summer of 1967, with the rebellions in New York, Detroit, and elsewhere, we felt that our preparations had, at least, put us on the same level as the rest of the country, and that the revolution would not pass us by. Our San Francisco group started attending and participating in any and all functions relevant to black people. And we tried to let everyone in our area, and we tried to get to know everyone in our area associated with the struggle. We also continued our community meetings. News of the death of Che Guevara in October of that year had us walking around in a stupor for a while, and although that came as a severe blow to the international struggle for freedom and justice of all people, we were proud to be among those who had responded to his battle cry and had picked up the fallen arms. Huey asked if we would conduct a meeting on Hunter's Point for him. He was supposed to go, but something had come up and he couldn't make it. We were honored that he thought enough of us to ask, and we were more than enthusiastic to do whatever he wanted. It was at that meeting that we had a new, surprising experience. We met our first resistance in the form of Adam Rogers. He was supposed to have been the biggest, baddest N-word on Hunter's Point, but when we encountered him, he came across like an Uncle Tom. He seemed to be impressed with our firearms demonstration, but he was violently against the idea of black people arming themselves for self-defense. He was convinced that would increase repression, even though history proved him wrong. When we examined the history of repression of black people, the only time there was significant decline in police violence and murders perpetrated against blacks was precisely the period when blacks were organized and had access to guns. Given the wave of terror and violence against blacks that continues to sweep the country, I truly believe there is a lesson to be learned from that fact. Rogers was one of the wounded in the Hunters Point Rebellion of the year before, and a photograph of him had been used by the news media to illustrate articles on the riots that broke out following the killing of a black teenager by police that September. Because of that, we were even more surprised by his reaction. It was not until later that we discovered that the administration of San Francisco Mayor Joseph Alito had sent in money after the rebellion and had bought off the so-called bad N-words. The same technique was used from coast to coast. Despite Rogers, most everyone seemed to like what we had to say and really related to the firearms demonstration. Several people wanted to take courses in handling weapons, and so I fixed a rendezvous for the following Saturday at the parking lot of the abandoned shopping center right on top of Hunters Point. The next day I arrived at the point at 7 in the morning in order to get set up before people began to gather. There wasn't going to be any target practice, but I would be firing a few shots in the air by way of demonstration. I knew that would pose no problem as far as the police were concerned. Due to their racism, whenever they heard shots on the point, they generally looked the other way. Once, during a dispute between two gangs, shooting broke out, and instead of police coming in to break it up, they sealed off the area and let them shoot it out. The gun battle lasted 24 hours, and the police didn't return until the next day. At around 8 o'clock, I saw David Hilliard's car driving up, which I found surprising because we had only seen each other a couple of times before. As the car approached, I recognized Emory Douglas and George Murray. Everyone had strange looks on their faces that made it clear that something was wrong. Damn, Huey had been shot and captured. He had shown up at David's wounded and bleeding heavily. There was real concern for his life, so David drove him to the hospital and left him on the steps, then drove straight to San Francisco to find me. He said Huey had asked him to ask me to help out in the aftermath, specifically dealing with the passenger who had been in Huey's car at the time of the shootout, with Officer John Frey of the Oakland Police, who'd been killed. There was also the problem of the guns Huey had stockpiled. I'll never understand why David didn't just bring the guns with him, but he hadn't, and I was obliged to go back into the area, get everything, and get back out safely. That might sound easy, but the shootout had occurred less than 3 hours before, and there was one policeman dead and one seriously wounded, so it was hot over in Oakland, to say the least. There was no time to go by the house and unload the guns I had on hand for the training, so I followed David back to Oakland with a trunk full of weapons. David took me into the backyard of a house that had a lot of weeds and a stack of old lumber in which he had stashed the gun. In his state of excitement, he couldn't remember exactly where the pistol was, and while we were looking, an elderly black woman came out of the house next door and asked what we were doing. David kept searching and didn't look up. She then said, "If you don't come out of there, I'm going to call the police." I began to panic and told David to say something to the woman. When he rose up, she recognized him and calmed down. This was David's house, and she was his neighbor. On the one hand, I was relieved, but on the other, if the police were looking for the passenger who'd been with Huey, it was certain they wouldn't miss David's house, as both were known Panthers. Finally, he found the gun, and it continues from there. So every 5 years, the U.S. Department of Agriculture comes out with new guidelines, and we just put up a video over at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program that talks about how the Trump administration, in this insanely corrupt deal with the $100 billion industry of ultra-processed, high-sugar, high-salt, high-fat foods that is literally killing 700,000 Americans a year, has said, oh, we're going to change the guidelines so that these fast food, high-processed food companies can shovel their stuff into our school lunch programs, into our kids. We're going to change the guidelines so people aren't informed about the importance of, dialing back somewhat on meat and on salt and sugar and all these other things. It's nuts. You can check the whole thing out over at thomhartmann.com. Look for the video for our, the supporters of our program at thomhartmann.com.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So are we going to vote in November? In 2 or 3 weeks, we're going to start seeing people in Wisconsin showing up in Milwaukee and Madison and rural hospitals with coronavirus because they went out and voted yesterday. And a week after that, in 3 weeks from now, you're going to start seeing some of those folks show up. Well, now they're not going to show up. They're needing respirators. And a week after that, you're going to see some of those folks dying. Because Robin Vos, the Speaker of the House or Assembly or whatever it's called in Wisconsin, basically the head Republican in Wisconsin, the guy who went out dressed like a moonwalk and said, everything is safe, just go vote. Because he does not want Democrats to vote. It's really just that simple. I mean, this is all about voter suppression. And it's quite obvious now that Robin Vos in Wisconsin and the entire Wisconsin Republican Party and the Republicans on the Wisconsin Supreme Court and the 5 conservatives on the U.S. Supreme Court don't give a rat's ass about who dies as long as the Republican Party can continue holding power. More Democrats than Republicans showed up to vote in the last 2 elections in Wisconsin. And yet, more than half of all the votes went to Democrats in Wisconsin. And yet, 5 out of their 8 members of Congress are Republicans. And Republicans control both their state assembly, their House of Representatives, and their Senate. This is all about power. This was a project. This was one of the pet projects of the Koch network and the billionaire buddies who heavily funded Scott Walker and put this useful idiot into power in Wisconsin. And they've done absolutely everything they can to hold that power against the will of the majority of the voters in the state of Wisconsin. This is their plan for America. And if we don't start passing federal legislation soon, these red states, these Republican-controlled states, they are not going to change their laws, their rules, and their policies. You've got 17 states where you basically have to have a doctor's slip or an excuse in order to get a vote-by-mail ballot. Here in Oregon, we've been voting by mail for decades. In Washington State, they've been doing it for years. It works really, really well. We have virtually no fraud, and what few fraudulent voters there are relatively easily detected. Donald Trump votes by mail, although, lying through his teeth again yesterday. He was like, well, this is fraud. No, it's not fraud, and it's not promoting fraud. It's not helping fraud or anything like that. Vote by mail is how we actually can get an election done in the middle of a pandemic. I mean, this is very straightforward stuff. This is not rocket science. It doesn't, require any kind of deep analysis. And yet, here you've got the chairwoman of the Republican Party. This is Ronna Romney McDaniel, Mitt Romney's niece, I believe she is, saying that Democrats want to promote mail-in voting, quote, as their next attempt to use the pandemic for political gain. She said, quote, this would vastly expand opportunities for fraud and weaken confidence in our elections. Pardon those of us who thought we already had democratic elections. No, when you're disenfranchising millions of people, when you're throwing 500,000 or more people off the voting rolls in Georgia just before the election, when you throw 200,000 people off the voting rolls in Wisconsin just before the election, when you throw a couple 100,000 people off the voting rolls in Ohio and Pennsylvania and Michigan just before the election, that's not a democratic election, small d. Ronna McDaniel goes on to say, the Democrats' all-mail ballots proposal is a ruse to legalize ballot harvesting nationwide. This is BS. She goes on to say, any person would be allowed to return an unlimited number of absentee ballots for voters, opening the door for political operatives to deliver ballots in bulk. Well, yeah, that's the same thing. This is the same thing as offering rides to the polls. But see, oh my God, Democrats might get organized and, go around and collect people's ballots to turn them in and make it easy for people so they don't have to come up with a stamp. She says they could even be paid as long as he or she is not paid based on the number of ballots returned. Right, there's nothing wrong with that. Just like there's nothing wrong with offering people free rides to the polls, which another thing that the Republicans hate. In fact, Donald Trump says, buses of black people went from Massachusetts to New Hampshire to vote against him, which is why he lost the primary in New Hampshire in 2016. No, he lost the primary because everybody knows he's a fool and a buffoon. It's just amazing. So the Republican Party, they're still following Paul Weyrich's mantra. I don't want everybody to vote. Our leverage in the elections, quite candidly, goes up as the voting populace goes down. You can find my rant on all this, by the way, over at buzzflash.com. The Republican Party has made it quite clear that they don't care what the fallout is from their voter suppression efforts, even if that includes people dying of coronavirus, as long as they can prevent people from voting. That's their thing. That's what they're all about. Meanwhile, there's a lot in the news right now. Donald Trump last night said, I would love to see a payroll tax cut. There are many people who would like to see it as a permanent cut. I'd like to have it regardless of the coronavirus. Right. A permanent cut in the payroll tax. In other words, end Social Security. Right. These guys, and he just says it, and there wasn't like an explosion of oh my God, in the press room because, of course, it's Donald Trump. Pastor Tony Spell of the Life Tabernacle Church in Baton Rouge. He wants people to keep coming to his church so they can keep leaving money in the collection plate. This grifter comes out and says to TMZ that true Christians would be willing to die from coronavirus as long as they put money in the collection plate. He said those who prefer tyranny over freedom do not deserve freedom. He says, the Bible teaches us to be absent from our bodies so we can be present with the Lord. So like any revolutionary or any zealot or any pure religious person, death looks to them like a welcome friend. He's not saying death looks to him like that. He's going to be up there, 30 feet from everybody out in the pews passing the collection plates around. Holy crap. And finally, will Donald Trump and his enablers... Not finally, actually. I got a whole other topic I want to reboot in about 4 minutes here. But will Donald Trump and his enablers ever face accountability for the coronavirus? You know, George W. Bush and Dick Cheney lied us into a war that cost 5,000 American lives and 200,000 Iraqi lives, destroyed the lives of at least 5 to 10 million Iraqis, destabilized a region, threw the United States into trillions of dollars of debt, and not to mention tens of thousands of wounded Americans. And they not only suffered no consequence for it, George W. Bush became buddies with Michelle Obama, Dick Cheney. Both of them got big book contracts. They got millions of dollars. Cheney's stock in Halliburton, which was nearly bankrupt when he became vice president, is worth millions, perhaps hundreds of millions of dollars. Dick Cheney's a very, very rich man as a result of this. Don Rumsfeld got a book contract. Paul Wolfowitz, who was the Secretary of Defense, is now the president of the World Bank. Thomas Friedman, David Brooks, these editorial writers, they kept their well-paid jobs. The hustlers on Fox News who sold us this war, they're still around. So is this going to happen again? Are Larry Kudlow and Kellyanne Conway and Mike Pence and Donald Trump and Rush Limbaugh and Hannity and Ingram, are they going to get away with this? Devin Nunes saying, oh, yeah, dude, it's no problem. Just go out to a restaurant. Matt Gaetz in Florida wearing a gas mask to make fun of the coronavirus. I mean, are they going to get away with it? Jerry Falwell Jr. refusing to close his university and inflicting on this small town next door death. These people are members of a death cult. And I fear they're going to get away with it. The same way Nixon got away with his crimes, the same way Reagan got away with his crimes, the same way that Bush got away with his crimes.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So anyway, I want to get into also this mind-boggling thing with the medical research right after this. Stick around. This is incredible. And welcome back. David in Los Angeles. Hey, David, what's on your mind today?
Thanks, and I hope you give me a second to kind of time all in. And the first thing is, Tom, is that I've been listening to these numbers about the numbers as it relates to blacks dying and being infected by this virus, which is extremely alarming throughout the nation, right? Now,
yes.
After hearing those numbers, I called Clyburn, right, who endorsed Biden and allowed him to catapult from South Carolina, and hence now he's the presidential candidate. And I cut him a new butthole because it's like what Bernie was suggesting. Now we talk about the ACA. A brother called in concerned about that. Right, and you rightfully pointed out that Trump can't even go back to throwing people off of the healthcare road after this madness is over with. But the reason I went off on Clyburn is like, what's going on in the black community in relationship to those crumbs to which they are that first trot of bailouts were about, now that they got to go back now, right? Mm-hmm. None of this was taken into consideration. And I called in before, Tom, and the congressman was on, and I asked him how soon will this money be dispersed, right? Now, now, Tom, I have been talking to a lot of my friends and whatnot and colleagues in reference to different aspects of this payout. And one of the guys called in who's on Social Security, right? And he hasn't filed that because he's retired for years. He don't know how he's going to get paid. So
he's
now
probably going to get paid through the Social Security. That they will use that as the way of knowing who he is, where he is, and how much money he makes.
Yeah, but that's the probability. But the vehicle by which this thing should be ironed out and already organized to make this possible, we're still dealing in probabilities.
Yes.
You see what I'm saying? So,
right, because it's up to the Trump administration to administer this, and we can't trust them to be competent at anything they do.
But we need to, as Democrats or the so-called progressives, if you will, when you're having a boxing camp, you have to have somebody in there to spar with that is up to snuff to to bringing you up, right? Mm-hmm. Now, if we just go in there and we pretend as though, we have did our due diligence for this, getting prep for this, what we're going to get is what we got the last time. And that is, you're going to get $500 billion for those who are not inquiring as to how they're going to get their monies.
Yeah.
But the people are out here inquiring about theirs and the vehicle by which it's going to be sundown and when. We don't know that out here.
Yeah. It's a tough one, David. And I'm sorry we're out of time, but I completely understand, and all we can do, calling Clyburn is a great start. I mean, all we can do is hold people accountable and keep bringing up these issues and make sure that everybody is not just registered to vote, but is on the list to get an absentee ballot now. We'll be back. Our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. We have a special video up over at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program, and it's about how a letter that the IRS sent out to 3.9 million Americans saved 700 lives. And you're like, wait a minute, the IRS saved 700 lives? How did that happen? Well, it had to do with Obamacare, and it's a fascinating story. And it turns out that this analysis of this IRS mailing was actually the first time that the federal government has done a study that actually proved that people having access to health care produces fewer deaths. For every 1,648 people who got the letter, there was one fewer premature death. I'll explain the whole thing in the video. It's as I said, it's available over at thomhartmann.com for people who are regular supporters of our program, and it is really worth checking out. And it's a great ad, essentially, for a national health care system. A little bit about medicine here and what's going on with regard to medicine. One of the things that we're learning, first of all, is that this virus is killing people of color, black people specifically, African Americans, in much higher proportions than it is killing white people. And, I don't know that I've seen any statistics on Hispanics, and, that will be coming out, I'm sure, as time goes on. But right now, in Louisiana, black Americans make up 70% of coronavirus deaths. In Chicago, there's 72% of coronavirus-related, COVID-19-related deaths are black Americans. That's 6 times the rate for white Chicago residents. And in both areas, only 30% of the population is black. In Illinois as a whole, black Americans are only 14% of the population, but they're statewide 41% of the coronavirus deaths. In Michigan, black Americans, 15% of the state's population, 40% of coronavirus deaths. In Milwaukee County, Wisconsin, 81% of the people killed so far are African Americans. Number one, African Americans are more likely to be doing blue-collar work than white-collar work, so they're less likely to be able to work from home, so they're more likely to be out there and being exposed to this virus, number one. Number two, the African American community has been widely discriminated against throughout the entire history of this country. Obviously, enslavement and everything else, but just in the last 60, 70 years. The reason why red states, in particular the southern states, have been unwilling to go along, the reason why they were unwilling to go along with single-payer health care when Harry Truman proposed it in 1947, the reason why they were unwilling to go along with single-payer health care when John Kennedy proposed it in 1961, the reason why these red states were unwilling to go along with Medicaid expansion all across the states in 1967 when Lyndon Johnson put it into law. The reason they refused to go along with it was because they did not want quote, undeserving black people. That was one of the phrases that was commonly used in the South to get, quote, free health care. That's the simple reality, is that racism has created economic inequalities, but also healthcare inequalities and healthcare outcome inequalities. And as a consequence of not having access to good healthcare, and as a consequence of not having access to good jobs in many cases, you have a large population, a consequential chunk of the African American population that is suffering from the diseases of poverty and oppression, including hypertension, which is the number one risk factor, the most lethal risk factor for coronavirus. About half of coronavirus deaths coming out of China were people who had hypertension. And obesity and diabetes, which is the second most dangerous of these things. So this is exposing. I mean, we saw yesterday in Wisconsin exposing the Republican voter scam. We're also seeing now it's Republican. Prior to 1965, it was Democrats in the South who opposed, black people getting health care. Now it's Republicans. It's bottom line, racist white people is the bottom line. Meanwhile, and this ties into this, I mean, this could be available to African Americans as well as to everybody else. An international team led by the University of British Columbia researcher Dr. Joseph Penninger has found a trial drug that blocks the cellular door that this COVID-19 uses. It was published in Cell magazine, and this is an amazing piece of research. ACE2 is a protein on the surface of a cell membrane that is the receptors for, it's called angiotensin. It's a hormone that the body uses to regulate blood pressure. And these receptor sites in the body are the place where this virus enters the body. And so they've come up with this thing called human recombinant soluble angiotensin converting enzyme 2, HRS ACE2, which blocks these receptor sites so that the virus can't get into your body. Now, here's the kicker. The reason why this was done as an international effort instead of in the United States is because they were able to demonstrate that this works by taking human blood vessel and human kidney tissues grown in petri dishes from human stem cells from aborted fetuses. And we're able to test this. In fact, one of the quotes from the study, using these organoids, these little tiny human organs that are grown in the lab, allows us to test in a very agile way treatments that are already being used for other diseases and are close to those validated. Time is short. Human organoids save the time that we would spend testing a new drug on humans. So compare that with the headline here from the Washington Post last year. Trump ban on fetal tissue research blocks coronavirus treatment effort. A senior scientist at a government biomedical research laboratory has been thwarted in his efforts to conduct experiments on possible treatments for the new coronavirus because of the Trump administration's restrictions on research with human fetal tissue. And they're talking about this immunologist at the National Institutes of Health in Montana who has been begging the officials to let him use these tissues because they've got some really substantial discoveries that they think they can play out. And the Trump administration said, no, that tissue comes from abortions. You may not do it.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And if people aren't dying in the United States as a result of a lack of this kind of research, we are going to be way behind the rest of the world when these new drugs are developed. Our book today is by Catherine Bailey. It's A Castle in Wartime, One Family, Their Missing Sons, and the Fight to Defeat the Nazis. It's an extraordinary and fascinating book. This is from the prologue. Dateline Innsbruck, Austria, 16 December 1944. Monica calling steamboat. This cryptic announcement, broadcast to Austria over the Voice of America, was received with relief by a handful of people able to decipher it. The coded message signaled that the Allies were still trying to infiltrate agents into Innsbruck to make contact with members of the Austrian resistance. It was 7 o'clock on a winter's morning, the gray old city walled in by snow-covered mountains. A roof of dense cloud hung over the domes and spires, cutting out the sky on the summit of the Nordkette. Towering 7,000 feet above the city, the sheer face of the mountain rose like a wall, blocking the north end of the fine Baroque streets. The illusion of being confined in a small space was maintained in the alleys and passageways in the medieval quarter. On a chill, gloomy day such as this, passing the tall, narrow-fronted Gothic houses, the sensation was of walking along the bottom of a ravine. Thick wreaths of smoke spiraled beneath the clouds. The day before, American planes had bombed the city, killing 259 people. In Herzog-Friedrichstrasse, a protective shroud covered the famous golden roof of the balcony designed for Emperor Maximilian in 1500. Beneath the bombed-out buildings, parties of children, drafted in from the villages along the valley, worked to clear the rubble. They were watched by small groups of SS soldiers who stood on the street corners guarding the defusing crews. Forcibly recruited from the nearby concentration camp at Reichenau, it was their job to deactivate the bombs that had failed to explode. The Allies were now convinced that Innsbruck, rather than the Reich capital of Berlin, was where the war was likely to culminate. Recent intelligence reports indicated that Hitler was building an Apfelfestung, an Alpine fortress, Alpenfestung, in the mountains that encircled the city. Blueprints obtained by OSS operatives, the OSS is the forerunner of the CIA, point to a chain of underground factories and armories. It was to this remote, impregnable fortress that Hitler and a coterie of his most fanatical supporters intended to retreat when the Wehrmacht was beaten. From here, they would carry on the fight, defended by elite SS troops and sustained by huge stores of supplies that had been carefully stockpiled in bomb-proof caves. With Hitler holding the high ground, Allied military commanders were predicting that the battle to take the fortress could extend the war by up to 2 years and exact more casualties than all of the previous fighting on the Western Front. In these circumstances, intelligence from Innsbruck, the capital of the Apfelfestung, was suddenly at a premium. Alan Dulles, the OSS station chief in Switzerland, hoped to recruit a network of agents from within the city. Their job would be to supply hard military intelligence and assist the passage of U.S. and British forces when they reached the western border of Austria. But as Dulles recognized, Innsbruck was not fertile ground. That autumn, the Gestapo had arrested all known anti-Nazis. Moving from house to house, the mopping up operation signaled their determination to suppress all resistance operations in an area they looked upon as their last bastion. Soon after midday on 16 December, the U.S. Air Force returned to bomb the city for the 4th time that month. A sharp left rally was executed immediately. After bombs away and a course flown around Innsbruck, the pilot reported. Due to undercast, no visual observation of results were possible. Some hours later, Frau Muttenschuldner, a resident of 47 years, sat down to write in her diary. "It is a black day for Innsbruck," she began. "The old city center has been hit, as well as the graveyard. Everyone feared there would be another raid, and sure enough, the enemy bombers came and wreaked their evil. There was no gas or water in the city, and the cemetery was now closed for burials. In the flat, dingy light, the only color was from the fires that had yet to be put out. Fraulein Kummer's photo studio is on fire," Frau Muttenschuldner reported. Vargar's paper warehouse, the stained glass factory at Müllerstrasse, Café Paul in Maximilianstrasse, and Hallensteiner's Gasthaus are all burning. Showers of sparks and burning paper are falling from the warehouse. One would marvel at the eerie beauty of it if it were not such a sad occasion. The raid marked a change of tactic. In addition to dropping 200 tons of bombs, the U.S. planes had dropped thousands of propaganda leaflets. In the coming weeks, they would drop thousands more. These and the messages broadcast on the BBC's Austrian service urged the city's inhabitants to rise up and prevent Hitler from making a last stand in the Tyrol. Tyroleans, we know that you will not permit it. You will see to it that none of the Nazi leaders can hide. We know that already Tyroleans are fighting the Nazis everywhere. Even if the Nazis still feel secure in your country, we know better. You are on our side. But the vast majority of Tyroleans were not on the Allies' side. The book, A Castle in Wartime.
Revolution is Mad King Trump deciding which states will live and which states will die. Associate Professor of Economics Pavlina Cherneva is here to talk about what would FDR do about COVID-19. The last Democratic governor of Alabama, Don Siegelman, drops by to talk about how prisons are handling the coronavirus and what they should do. In Geeky Science, attorney and regulatory policy advocate with Public Citizen Amit Narang is here, asking why Trump is fighting clean car standards instead of the coronavirus. Check it all out wherever fine podcasts are available. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you live from Shelter at Home. And I've got to, I don't have any connections over at Johns Hopkins University. But I've got their coronavirus COVID-19 global cases by the Center for Systems Science and Engineering at Johns Hopkins University. I've got this page up, and it shows that there's 1.4 million confirmed cases in the world, 400,000 of them in the United States, 146,000 in Spain, 135,000 in Italy, etc. In the total confirmed cases, it lists U.S. at the top of the pile. We have now hit 13,000 people dead in the United States as a result of 3 months of Donald Trump's lies. And now it's looking like he was actually notified back in November. So I think we could say 4 months of Donald Trump's lies. And when you look at the deaths on the Johns Hopkins page, this has me baffled. We're at 13,000 deaths right now, right? Keep that in your mind. It says total deaths, 83,000. And then it lists by country. 17,000 deaths, Italy. 14,000 deaths, Spain. Now keep in mind, we're at 13,000. But then it jumps to France. 10,000 deaths, France. 6,000 deaths, United Kingdom. 4,000 deaths, New York City. 3,900 deaths, Iran. 3,200 deaths, Hubei, China. Why doesn't it have the United States on that list? Is Johns Hopkins afraid of Donald Trump? Is that what's going on here? I mean, under recovered, it says 77,000 China, 48,000 Spain, 36,000 Germany, 27,000 Iran, 24,000 Italy, 22,000 U.S. They've got our aggregate numbers in total confirmed, and they got our aggregate numbers in recovered, but under deaths, they don't have aggregate United States numbers. And within the next 4 or 5 days, we're going to be number one in the world in terms of deaths because Donald Trump lied to us all these months. What's going on with Johns Hopkins? I'm just, I'm scratching my head here. If you've got any connections there or you know what's going on, let me know what's going on. Michael in Stagecoach, Nevada. Hey, Michael, what's on your mind today?
I have a son that's addicted to heroin, and right now he's in prison in Columbus, Ohio.
Oh, my.
And I finally got to hear from him, and he tells me that someone in his pod has died, a young man, from coronavirus. They waited till he was couldn't breathe to take him to OSU. And he has an infection of some kind. And they're telling the prisoners they have a sinus infection. And something's happened with the staff. They're down to 1 meal a day. They hardly have staff. He said yesterday the prisoners are so scared that the staff talked them out of rioting. And he's scared to death, and people are dying, and he's being lied to. And I just wanted to share that with you guys. I also wanted to share with you the first time I ever talked about him was when I talked about him 3 years ago when he wanted to go to college. And it wasn't a Pell Grant. And I want people to hear the results of austerity and how it affects young people. And my son is being punished maybe with death, being addicted to drugs. And I wanted to share with you, and I have to hang up. I'm so upset, but thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. I'm so sorry to hear that story, and we all need to be praying for Michael's son. These are such difficult times. Bill in Richmond, Virginia. Hey, Bill, what's on your mind today?
Thanks for taking my call.
The reason I had called was this, because I've heard all this talk about Wisconsin and the thing about how they wouldn't change the date of the election. It was yesterday. Right. Well, we've got primaries in Virginia coming up on June 9th, and our stay-at-home policy goes through June 10th. And Governor Northam and Attorney General Mark Herring have both said they're not going to change those dates. So, my feeling is people that go in to vote that day would be in the same danger as people are in Wisconsin.
Yeah, perhaps even a greater danger, because as time goes on, there more and more people get infected. Is that state? I mean, you've got a Democratic governor and lieutenant governor. Are they not sending ballots out to everybody in the state for vote by mail? Absentee ballots?
No, they don't have vote by mail here. Oh, they never have. Oh, they do have absentee.
Well, no,
and that's
right. That's what I'm talking about. They call it absentee ballots, but it's a ballot that you vote by mail.
But one of the points that the Attorney General brought up, and I looked it up to see if it's true, he went through and said, well, in the War of 1812, when the White House was burning, they still had elections. Civil War, they had elections. Now, the soldiers were allowed to vote by mail, I think, then, during the Spanish flu. Ironically, the protocol they had was the same thing. Everybody that went to vote had to wear a mask, because I know it supposedly won't protect you from somebody, it won't keep you from getting it, but so that way, that's the only way you could vote. And they did have the spacing, believe it or not, so this isn't something totally new. And in World War II, no, in fact, the election, FDR wouldn't change the election dates in World War II. So I guess if it's going to go by, past experience, that there probably should be elections. But the only thing that I do have a problem with is no one has addressed this issue in Virginia. I know it's another 3 months out.
The Virginia government needs to be sending out an absentee ballot to every single registered voter in the state. And Bill, I encourage you to contact the governor's office and register your objections. If that's not the case, I can't say that it's not. I don't know, I don't live in Virginia. I don't pay that much attention to Virginia politics. It may well be that they're doing that and you're just not aware of it. So let's check our facts here before we jump on Ralph Northam. Nick in Chicago. Hey Nick, what's up?
Hey Tom, thank you for taking my call. How do you do?
Good, thank you.
I want to address, I know you had Congressman Pocan on earlier today, but I want to address what happened in Wisconsin and whether or not you think that played a factor in Bernie Sanders suspending his campaign. What I could see being happening is they saw what happened in Wisconsin, and everybody in the DNC said, okay, this might end up being a hotter mess than it already is. Let's just cut our losses and make things easier for us. Do you think that's a plausible position that Democrats might have taken, or if Sanders took it?
Yeah, I don't think it was the DNC. Bernie does not dance to the tune of the DNC. He's very much, his own man. But I think that Bernie probably looked at people showing up to vote and realized that some of those people were just out there because they wanted to vote for him, and they literally were putting their lives at risk, and probably decided, if the Republicans are going to play with people's lives like this, that he didn't want to be part of it. I'm just guessing. I don't know. Sean has reached out to his campaign to see if he wants to drop by, and that would be a good question to ask him. Nick, thanks for the call. Harvey in Minneapolis. Hey, Harvey, what's up?
Morning. Good afternoon, Tom. I'm sorry this question's a little bit out of sync with the current discussion, but I wanted to ask it to Congressman Pocan. Okay, well, there hasn't been any real discussion publicly or anywhere in the news about where we're paying for one half of our budget to cover
3 days to go. It's Wednesday, and we have a new premium. And by the way, thanks to the folks who stepped up yesterday. We as I said,
what am I missing here?
we have $40,000 we have to.
Is the question, how are we funding this so far $3 or $4 trillion that we're throwing at the economy?
Correct.
Is that
there just hasn't been any conversation about it. And
we're funding it by issuing treasuries. The government is issuing IOUs, and those IOUs are being purchased by individual investors and governments all around the world. They're called treasuries, and Treasury bills, Treasury bonds, and it's just adding to the national debt. That's how it's being done.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Yeah, thanks a lot for the call. Peter in Lawton, Oklahoma. Hey, Peter, what's up?
Yes, sir. I just have one question for you. Have you heard any studies whether this virus can mutate and get into our food chain, such as cattle, pork, and chickens? And I'll hang up and listen to your answer.
Sure, yeah. Thank you, Peter. Both pork and chicken are vulnerable to the flu virus. I don't know if they're vulnerable to the coronavirus. The closest I've seen of, with any certainty is that cats can get it. And keep in mind, it was a civet cat who had SARS, and the coronavirus is in that SARS family. But in terms of, but even when pigs and chickens get the flu, once they're killed and cooked, you don't get the flu from them. But again, it kind of highlights the horrors and brutality of animal agriculture, at least the way it's practiced in the United States, and these zoonotic diseases, I guess is how you say it. We're going to have a guest at the top of the next hour who's going to be talking specifically about this issue. So I appreciate you bringing it up. It's a good tease for that conversation, but I want to learn more about this as well, how these diseases have been jumping from animals into humans for millennia, centuries certainly. We'll be back. It's 45 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. Increasingly, it looks like Donald Trump knew about this pandemic not in January, not in December, but back in November. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
So is he responsible for 13,000 deaths because he wasn't paying attention in November, or because he ignored the voices in November? And welcome back. Len in Silva, North Carolina. Hey, Len, what's on your mind today?
Hey there, Tom. It's a couple of quick things. First of all, I hate the fact that people are calling this a war, because with a war, men can stop that. And also, I hate the fact that the Attorney General, the Surgeon General said that this was going to be our Pearl Harbor or our 9/11. Those were surprises.
I think he was just, let's cut Jerome Adams some slack here, Len.
I'm not going to give him slack on that one.
This guy is scared to death for his own life, Len, right now. He's African-American. He pointed out yesterday in his press conference that he has high blood pressure himself, that is the legacy of discrimination against black people in the United States. This is the Surgeon General of the United States. Now, I'm convinced that the only reason that Donald Trump isn't trotting him out every day along with the rest of the crew is because he's black. And Trump is very, very committed to having all the pictures coming out of the White House being just white people. I'm serious about that. He's just made it very, very clear that women and minorities need not apply, or particularly minorities. But I'm going to cut him some slack. Dale in Weaverville, California. Hey, Dale, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I wanted to follow up on a point you were making earlier about will the Trump administration be held accountable by if we elect the next Democrat president, and which will more than likely be Joe Biden, who I will vote for, very enthusiastically.
Yeah, me too.
But I do also think that if he is elected, he will do the same thing Barack Obama did and go on with, we have to look forward, we can't look back.
I don't think so,
and Barack Obama refused to hold anybody on Wall Street accountable. He refused to hold...
I know, Obama refused to hold them accountable, but Clinton refused to hold them accountable. Jimmy Carter refused to hold Richard Nixon and Jerry Ford accountable. I get that.
It just seems...
I think the times are different.
It seems to be a Democrat thing to... think. I have a feeling some of them.
It may be, Dale, but this time people died. There's a big difference between, like whining about, well, Ronnie Reagan got away with, flipping the election with Jimmy Carter. Yeah, he did. He committed a crime. There's a whole chapter about it in my book on the Supreme Court, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court, The Betrayal of America. Yeah, Reagan got away with that. And yeah, Nixon got away with lying us into Vietnam. Well, people died in Vietnam, actually. 56,000 people died in Vietnam. And we'll probably be at those numbers in just a matter of weeks here. But I have a hard time believing that this time around, there's not going to be some level of accountability. I think, there really has to be. I think that Donald Trump, you've got Letitia James, the Attorney General of the state of New York, going after Donald Trump aggressively, saying, we're going to take this guy down. You've got several congressional committees who are looking into his crimes. They would be holding hearings right now, frankly, if Congress wasn't in lockdown. I absolutely believe there's going to be accountability. Let me rephrase that. I actually absolutely hope there's going to be accountability. It would be a refreshing change for this country. We'll be back. It's 49 minutes past the hour. Hey, did you know that Hillary Clinton actually won Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, North Carolina, and Florida in the 2016 election? It's on page 92 of my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting. So every 5 years, the U.S. Department of Agriculture comes out with new guidelines, and we just put up a video over at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program that talks about how the Trump administration, in this insanely corrupt deal with the $100 billion industry of ultra-processed, high-sugar, high-salt, high-fat foods that is literally killing 700,000 Americans a year, has said, oh, we're going to change the guidelines so that these fast food, high-processed food companies can shovel their stuff into our school lunch programs, into our kids. We're going to change the guidelines so people aren't informed about the importance of, dialing back somewhat on meat and on salt and sugar and all these other things. It's nuts. You can check the whole thing out over at thomhartmann.com. Look for the video for our, the supporters of our program at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Steve in Cooperstown, New York. Hey, Steve, what's up?
Yes, I wanted to pipe in about Lindsey, whichever way the wind blows, Graham, and our so-called leader of the Senate, who vociferously spoke out against Trump when he was running, and who now think that the man walks on water. I'd like to. Graham was invited down to Mar-a-Lago a couple of weekends to play golf and be wined and dined. I'm just wondering, what is it that made these people change? Secondly,
power.
My next, quickly.
I just answer your question very quickly, Steve. It's power. These guys are sucking up to power. Donald Trump has power, so they're sucking up to him and kissing his butt. Next question.
Okay, well, I think when he was running, I read either in The Economist or the New York Times that the Trump family was intimately involved with the Russian mafia. I'm wondering if you have any info on that, and also what's happening with investigations regarding Trump's involvement with Russia. It just seems like we don't hear anything.
The investigations, the federal investigations into Trump and Russia. Yeah, thanks a lot, Steve. The federal investigations into Trump and Russia pretty much ended with the impeachment, to the best of my knowledge. We have a federal judge now, Reggie Jackson, who has just received, or actually is a week and a half ago, received the unredacted report from Bill Barr, the unredacted Mueller report. What he's going to do with that, we don't know, because the courts are largely shut down. The Congress is largely shut down. Sending congressional inquiries is kind of ground to a halt. But there's no shortage of documentation. David Korn co-authored a book, on this, of Trump's involvement with Russian oligarchs, buying and selling real estate, laundering their money using real estate, stuff like this. So the Kushner family was doing that before Trump. to the best of my knowledge. So, these real estate barons who make their money in sketchy ways. Phil in Brookings, South Dakota. Hey, Phil, what's up? Phil, you are on the air. I'm not hearing Phil. Marilyn in Sarasota, Florida. Hey, Marilyn, what's on your mind today?
Hi. I just wanted to let you know that I live in Florida, and there's a Florida map that is also put out by JHU, Florida COVID-19 dashboard, and it does show USA total deaths and total cases, all kinds of stuff on here. You can even look this up by zip code. It's amazing. So it's
I'm looking
Florida,
at their. Go ahead.
It's Florida COVID-19 dashboard.
Okay.
And I just wanted to let you know.
I'll have to check it out. Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm looking at the general map. The coronavirus cases by center.
Yeah, the general one doesn't show. It doesn't show the total, I don't think, for China either, though. It shows by province. And in Florida, they've cut it down to states.
Yeah, you're right.
On the map.
China and the United States. Yeah, I think that they should be showing the country because, we're going to be number one here any day now. Marilyn, thank you for the call, and thanks for the heads up on that. Bob in Northville, near Pontiac in Michigan. Hey, Bob, what's up? Bob, you are on the air. I'm not hearing Bob. Steve, and when you call, there's a time delay here, and so you have to be listening to your telephone, not your radio. Steve in Everett, Washington. Hey, Steve, what's up?
I was just going to suggest that you see if you can get some doctors in the red states that don't allow absentee balloting just because you want one to give people notes for medical reasons, for health reasons, so they don't have to go to the
that's a great suggestion.
And
suggestion. And yes, my prescription pad is available.
Exactly. And you've got to be enough doctors that are willing to do that are not already up to their ears in this thing. And send them in.
Sure. There's a lot of doctors. Yeah, I'm with you, Steve. There's a lot of doctors right now whose practices have really, really shrunk because people are afraid to go to the doctor's office. And so, you've got pediatricians and eye, ear, and nose specialists and, all kinds of these specialties and subspecialties where their offices are just vacant. And so, if those, if you could get a kind of a coalition of doctors across those 17 states where you have to have an excuse to get an absentee ballot, and, they could just write a blanket form letter for people and they could personalize it individually. That would be a tremendous service. Steve, I think you're onto a great idea.
And send them return receipt requested so that if they are stonewalled and lost in the mail, people can at least stand up and say, I tried, here's the paperwork.
Yeah.
And one other thing.
Good one. Steve.
And
I think the music took you one other thing there, Steve. Sorry. Anyhow, we'll be back. We're going to talk about zoonotic diseases that jump from animals to humans right after the break. It's going to be a fascinating conversation. I'm expecting it to be a fascinating conversation. Stick around. We'll be right back right after the news and breaks and whatever it is at the top of the hour for you.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
We say fight back!
have a special video up over at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program, and it's about how a letter that the IRS sent out to 3.9 million Americans saved 700 lives. And you're like, wait a minute, the IRS saved 700 lives? How did that happen? Well, it had to do with Obamacare, and it's a fascinating story. And it turns out that this analysis of this IRS mailing was actually the first time that the federal government has done a study that actually proved that people having access to health care produces fewer deaths. For every 1,648 people who got the letter, there was one fewer premature death. I'll explain the whole thing in the video. It's you know, as I said, it's available over at thomhartmann.com for people who are regular supporters of our program, and it is really worth checking out. And it's a great ad, essentially, for a national health care system. Our book today is by Catherine Bailey. It's A Castle in Wartime, One Family, Their Missing Sons, and the Fight to Defeat the Nazis. It's an extraordinary and fascinating book. This is from the prologue. Dateline Innsbruck, Austria, 16 December 1944. Monica calling steamboat. This cryptic announcement, broadcast to Austria over the Voice of America, was received with relief by a handful of people able to decipher it. The coded message signaled that the Allies were still trying to infiltrate agents into Innsbruck to make contact with members of the Austrian resistance. It was 7 o'clock on a winter's morning, the gray old city walled in by snow-covered mountains. A roof of dense cloud hung over the domes and spires, cutting out the sky on the summit of the Nordkette. Towering 7,000 feet above the city, the sheer face of the mountain rose like a wall, blocking the north end of the fine Baroque streets. The illusion of being confined in a small space was maintained in the alleys and passageways in the medieval quarter. On a chill, gloomy day such as this, passing the tall, narrow-fronted Gothic houses, the sensation was of walking along the bottom of a ravine. Thick wreaths of smoke spiraled beneath the clouds. The day before, American planes had bombed the city, killing 259 people. In Herzog-Friedrichstrasse, a protective shroud covered the famous golden roof of the balcony designed for Emperor Maximilian in 1500. Beneath the bombed-out buildings, parties of children, drafted in from the villages along the valley, worked to clear the rubble. They were watched by small groups of SS soldiers who stood on the street corners guarding the defusing crews. Forcibly recruited from the nearby concentration camp at Reichenau, it was their job to deactivate the bombs that had failed to explode. The Allies were now convinced that Innsbruck, rather than the Reich capital of Berlin, was where the war was likely to culminate. Recent intelligence reports indicated that Hitler was building an Apfelfestung, an Alpine fortress, Alpenfestung, in the mountains that encircled the city. Blueprints obtained by OSS operatives, the OSS is the forerunner of the CIA, point to a chain of underground factories and armories. It was to this remote, impregnable fortress that Hitler and a coterie of his most fanatical supporters intended to retreat when the Wehrmacht was beaten. From here, they would carry on the fight, defended by elite SS troops and sustained by huge stores of supplies that had been carefully stockpiled in bomb-proof caves. With Hitler holding the high ground, Allied military commanders were predicting that the battle to take the fortress could extend the war by up to 2 years and exact more casualties than all of the previous fighting on the Western Front. In these circumstances, intelligence from Innsbruck, the capital of the Apfelfestung, was suddenly at a premium. Alan Dulles, the OSS station chief in Switzerland, hoped to recruit a network of agents from within the city. Their job would be to supply hard military intelligence and assist the passage of U.S. and British forces when they reached the western border of Austria. But as Dulles recognized, Innsbruck was not fertile ground. That autumn, the Gestapo had arrested all known anti-Nazis. Moving from house to house, the mopping up operation signaled their determination to suppress all resistance operations in an area they looked upon as their last bastion. Soon after midday on 16 December, the U.S. Air Force returned to bomb the city for the fourth time that month. A sharp left rally was executed immediately after bombs away and a course flown around Innsbruck, the pilot reported. Due to undercast, no visual observation of results were possible. Some hours later, Frau Muttenschuldner, a resident of 47 years, sat down to write in her diary. "It is a black day for Innsbruck," she began. "The old city center has been hit, as well as the graveyard. Everyone feared there would be another raid, and sure enough, the enemy bombers came and wreaked their evil. There was no gas or water in the city, and the cemetery was now closed for burials. In the flat, dingy light, the only color was from the fires that had yet to be put out. Fraulein Kummer's photo studio is on fire," Frau Muttenschuldner reported. Vargar's paper warehouse, the stained glass factory at Müllerstrasse, Café Paul in Maximilianstrasse, and Hallensteiner's Gasthaus are all burning. Showers of sparks and burning paper are falling from the warehouse. One would marvel at the eerie beauty of it if it were not such a sad occasion. The raid marked a change of tactic. In addition to dropping 200 tons of bombs, the U.S. planes had dropped thousands of propaganda leaflets. In the coming weeks, they would drop thousands more. These, and the messages broadcast on the BBC's Austrian service, urged the city's inhabitants to rise up and prevent Hitler from making a last stand in the Tyrol. "Tyroleans, we know that you will not permit it. You will see to it that none of the Nazi leaders can hide. We know that already Tyroleans are fighting the Nazis everywhere. Even if the Nazis still feel secure in your country, we know better. You are on our side." But the vast majority of Tyroleans were not on the Allies' side. The book, A Castle in Wartime. Have come to believe that a man who cheated on his pregnant wife was handpicked by God. Of course, Trump is not carrying out this indoctrination single-handedly through his Twitter account. The book, The Cult of Trump.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Zach Corrigan is on the line with us. Zach is the senior attorney with Food and Water Watch. foodandandwaterwatch.org is the website, of course. And you can tweet him at Corrigan Zach or Food and Water. Zach, welcome back to the program, or welcome to the program.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks for joining us. I wanted to talk about diseases that jump from animals to humans, given that the coronavirus that is ravaging the world right now killed over 13,000 Americans so far because of Donald Trump's failure to do anything in the first 2 or 3 months. It apparently started with bats and maybe pangolins, these little anteater kind of animals in China. And you know, we've seen other of these diseases. And also, help me with my pronunciation. This is one of those words that I don't think I've ever heard. I've always just read. I always pronounced it in my head, zoonotic, but somebody called yesterday and said it's zoonotic. So anyhow, tell me about this, these diseases.
Certainly, Tom. And I'm not sure if I can help the pronunciation debates. I think it might be tomato, but I can tell you a little bit about zoonotic diseases. That's how I pronounce it. I think that most Americans before this COVID-19 outbreak would have never heard of zoonotic diseases or would not be concerned about them. But in reality, quite simply, they're just animals that are diseases that pass between humans and animals. And it's pretty shocking, I think, for most folks to find out that, according to the CDC, 6 out of 10 known infectious diseases can be spread from animals, and 75% of new or emerging infectious diseases in people come from animals. Tens of thousands of Americans get sick every year from zoonotic diseases. So they're a really serious problem. Obviously, the current pandemic sheds a whole new light on this, but people should be concerned about zoonotic conditions and zoonotic diseases all of the time, not just during times like this.
Now, do those numbers you just quoted include things like E. coli and Listeria infections that are specific to the GI tract, or are those all more systemic diseases like tuberculosis and I believe gonorrhea also started out in animals, or maybe it was syphilis?
It would include both, and we're concerned about those sorts of diseases that you get foodborne. I think people oftentimes make light of problems like foodborne illnesses, saying they have a stomach bug, but it can be quite serious. It can put people out of work for days at a time and can result in hospitalization and death. And that's from things like salmonella or E. coli. But it also includes more serious, I think what people would think of as more serious, like influenza. And a lot of people are now finding out about the 1918 influenza outbreak, but few people actually know that during that outbreak, swine were also, there was an outbreak with swine as well.
Well, that outbreak began in Kansas with a pig farm, didn't it? I mean, didn't it come from pigs and go into humans in Kansas?
That's
back
right,
in,
and vice versa,
1917?
too. That's right, and vice versa. And as late as of 2009, there was an outbreak. People may remember the H1N1 virus. And that was, they're not quite sure where it originated, but it came from a mixture of swine, avian, and human lineages of the influenza virus that ended up killing 125 people in 69 countries.
So what do we do with this information, Zach? I mean, we've known for, I assume, centuries that some diseases come from animals and humans catch them and then they become transmissible person to person. Clearly the so-called wet markets where wild animals are sold for food, and this is not unique to China or Southeast Asia. I've seen these markets in Africa as well as Asia, and I've seen something close to them in South America. They seem to be more markets of poverty, basically. People are resorting to eating, well, I mean, there's parts of America where, they hunt possum and squirrel and even, some people will even eat roadkill. And, if it's a matter of survival, people will eat whatever's available to them. But how does this inform us with regard to these things? First of all, with regard to wild animals, and then secondly, with regard to domesticated animals that we're using for food.
Yeah, well, certainly. And I think that there is going to be a movement. We've already seen a movement in China to limit these wet markets and limit the contact between people and animals. But I also think there needs to be a transition for folks to realize that this is not something that's just happening elsewhere. This is not just a China problem. This is a problem that happens with our domestic animals, too. And while we are concerned, and obviously so, about the current pandemic, we are currently, Food and Water Watch is working to fight against this administration's current rollbacks of protections that would prevent the spread of disease from animals to swine. And these are
rollbacks like what, rollbacks. Zach? For example.
I'm sorry, Tom, what was that?
For example. Rollbacks like what, for example?
Yes, great. So under the new rules finalized just this year, it is now the employees of slaughter plants who are chiefly responsible for identifying diseases in animals prior to and instead of federal inspectors. And this means that under or untrained employees will be the gatekeepers, ensuring that there aren't diseased animals entering the food supplies or just sent to a different farm or sent to a different slaughterhouse where the disease can be spread. And that's very troubling to us.
Zach, we just have a minute and a half here. A real quick question. About a decade ago, or maybe longer, there was a lot of concern about folded proteins, these proteins that cause mad cow disease jumping from cattle to humans, and that may play a role in the explosion of dementia and what's diagnosed as Alzheimer's in America. What's the status of all that?
I think research is still being done on what is the cause, how these prions work and how they affect human health. I think this is more research needs to be done, but we should, if there's anything that we have learned from this pandemic, it's that we should be working with extreme precaution. We should be trying to minimize humans' exposure to animals that are potentially diseased, and we shouldn't be limiting or relaxing such rules.
Yeah. And we shouldn't be laying off government inspectors and replacing them with corporations managing their own. This is just incredible stuff.
This is the wrong time to allow pork companies to self-police their hog supply for diseases. That's for sure.
Yeah. If you want to see what's the disease from pork that used to be so problematic. Anyhow, if you want to see some of these resurgences, Zach Corrigan with Food and Water Watch, foodandwaterwatch.org is the website. Zach is the senior attorney there. Zach, thanks so much for dropping by today. Great talking with you.
Thanks so much, Tom.
My pleasure. Great having you with us. We'll be back. We'll continue the conversation and a bunch of other things here right after this.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So did Trump know in November? And if he did, what does that mean for his future and for America? And welcome back. Christopher in Vancouver, Washington. Hey, Christopher, you're right across the river from me. What's up?
Hey, Tom. Hey, I just wanted to kind of update you on something going on here, and I've been watching it very closely. Our mortgage on our house here is through Chase, and I've been trying to contact them for days and days and days. Finally got through to them by calling my local branch. And I wanted to apply for the mortgage assistance program that they have. And and I asked for three things only. One, to delay our payments and add it on to the end of our loan.
Right.
Say, for instance, if it's 90 days, just add 90 days to the end of our loan. The other thing I asked for was to no penalties, no fees for delay of payment. And third, I asked for do not report this delay to the credit reporting companies. Right. Okay, I finally got the paperwork that I needed. I sent it in. Just 2 days ago, I read a letter from Jamie Dimon to the shareholders, and he said basically they were going to do what I asked for, including no more stock buybacks during this time period. So I said, great, that's great news. Okay, this is what exactly I asked for. He put that exactly in the letter as if I wrote him to myself. But then yesterday, I did some research, and I found some information where Chase is going to do that, but here's the caveat. At the end of the term, say it's 90 or 120 days, I will have a balloon payment. And
you mean at the end of the pause, not at the end of your mortgage?
Correct. And so I was very disturbed by that because Chase spent over $80 billion for stock buybacks. They squandered that bailout money and their tax cut, and now they want me to do a balloon payment. I mean, so I guess their future plan is we want people to be in debt and we want to foreclose. I mean, does this make any sense at all? So
no, it doesn't.
What I did yesterday,
from the point of view of what's good for the public and what's good for consumers, from the point of view of Chase stockholders and very, very rich people like Jamie Dimon, who is one of America's most grotesque oligarchs, I'm sure it makes perfect sense. You know, they're having to borrow money out in the public market in order to finance your loan. And they're paying very, very little for that money, a quarter of a point or whatever, but still they're having to, you know, their expenses don't stop just because your loan did. And so they're going to say, we're not going to eat that, you know, that small hiccup of expenses for 90 days or 120 days or whatever it turns out to be. We're going to force you to eat that. And we want our profit, by the way, and we want it in this quarter or at least in this year so we don't end up having a bad year so that, you know, good old Jamie doesn't look bad in, you know, when compared to other corporate CEOs. That's the, you know, that's what makes sense to me. I think that's their thinking, Christopher.
Yeah,
I think it's morally wrong.
It's very disturbing, Tom, that during this time, that this is something they would do.
Yeah. Well, and Chase also gets to tell the entire world how wonderful they are, and then the only people who know how they're screwing their customers are their customers. And it's only a small subset of their customers who actually have mortgages with them and who might be in trouble. So, you know, they can afford to piss off 5 or 10% of the American population, or probably less than that, as long as the rest of the American population thinks they're wonderful.
Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. So for our So every 5 years, the U.S. Department of Agriculture comes out with new guidelines, and we just put up a video over at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program that talks about how the Trump administration, in this insanely corrupt deal with the $100 billion industry of ultra-processed, high-sugar, high-salt, high-fat foods that is literally killing 700,000 Americans a year, has said, oh, we're going to change the guidelines so that these fast food, high-processed food companies can shovel their stuff into our school lunch programs, into our kids. We're going to change the guidelines so people aren't informed about the importance of, you know, dialing back somewhat on meat and on salt and sugar and all these other things. It's nuts. You can check the whole thing out check it all over out. at thomhartmann.com. Look for the video for our, you know, the supporters of our program at thomhartmann.com.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and a couple other things that I wanted to touch on here before we wrap up, and before I just throw it all to your calls here today. You know, I mentioned in the last hour that some really exciting research has been done finding a drug that may well block the ability of the COVID virus or the coronavirus. I guess the proper usage is we refer to the virus as the coronavirus and we refer to the disease as COVID-19, sort of like human immunodeficiency virus. HIV is the virus, AIDS is the disease it causes. So that the virus, in order to become COVID-19, it has to get inside our cells. And these guys have developed this new drug that somehow blocks or closes up these angiotensin receptor sites on cells in the body. And the angiotensin receptor sites are really, really present in large numbers in our lung tissue and our cardiovascular tissue, our heart and our bloodstream, you know, our veins and arteries. And this is one of the reasons why one of the main things, you know, one of the more common, not the most common, presentations of COVID-19, but a common presentation of COVID-19 is a heart attack. And because, you know, so anyhow, they taking human stem cells that they got from aborted fetuses. These are cells, stem cells are cells that can become any cell in the body. And so they cause these stem cells to become lung cells, or become kidney cells, or become heart cells. And in another piece of research, and this is equally mind-boggling, they actually transplanted some of these human cells into mice. And the mice grew lungs that were filled with human lung tissue because they used stem cells from humans and in these transgenic mice. And then they were able to test this drug on the mice, on human lung tissue in the mice. Now, I'm not a big fan of experimentation on animals. I prefer the Petri dish technique, but nonetheless, and the Petri dish technique was what did the initial research on this thing, where they actually took these human stem cells and they grew them into lung tissue on the Petri dish, or however they do it, but not inside a mouse. And that's where they were able to demonstrate the validity of this new drug. We are not doing this research in the United States because the Republicans, the Trump administration, have made it illegal for researchers to work with human stem cells. This is how these so-called evangelicals, these so-called Christians, are just screwing with us. I mean, it's a death cult. They call themselves Christians. They call themselves Jesus followers. It's a death cult. Jerry Falwell reopening his university. This pastor down in Louisiana saying, "Oh, people should be willing to die for Jesus." And what he's really saying is people should be willing to die to come into my church and put money in the collection plate. What Jerry Falwell was really saying is, what, you wanted me to give up a couple of months of revenue for my university? This is what Donald Trump is talking about. Every time Donald Trump talks about we've got to open the country back up, what he's saying is that his hotels are hemorrhaging money. His family has gone hat in hand to Deutsche Bank, to whom they owe at least $1 billion. Donald Trump is not a rich man. He's deeply in debt. And he has gone to Deutsche Bank and said, please suspend our loans. Please give us some forbearance. And Deutsche Bank is sitting around going, maybe, maybe not. I don't know. What do you think? And in the meantime, Donald Trump is like, we got to get the doors open again. My hotels are losing a fortune. I mean, that's really what's going on. Whenever you hear Donald Trump talking about this, and I guarantee you, one of the reasons why he's firing these inspector generals, the inspector general for relief, for the money relief, is because he wants to take a big pile of it for himself, and for his buddies, for Carl Icahn, and for et cetera, for all his billionaire buddies, his Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross, another billionaire buddy. These guys are grifters, and hustlers, and scam artists, and they want our tax dollars. Meanwhile, Elizabeth Warren has tweeted out a plan on small business loans. She says we should eliminate the cap on total relief. What has happened is a lot of fairly large businesses, like giant franchises, are saying that they qualify as small businesses. And I know people who have bought franchises over the years, and some of them actually are small business people. Some of these franchises, though, are, you got franchise owners who own 50, 100, 300 franchises. They're multimillionaires, in some cases billionaires. Anyhow, those are the people that are stepping to the front of the line because they've got these giant franchises behind them whose lawyers are, cranking this stuff out, and it's just sucked all this money out of the fund. And so now, the Trump administration and the Republicans are saying, we need to authorize another $200 billion. Well, Elizabeth Warren is saying, just get rid of the cap. Give them whatever they need. Let's make business stable in the United States. But let's also do it with an inspector general who's actually going to provide oversight, not some toady that Donald Trump puts into place. Pick up your calls after the break. It's 28 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Speaking the truth, some multinational corporations would really rather you didn't know all about. Thom Hartmann here with you. We'll be right back.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is ADHD, A Hunter in a Farmer's World by Thom Hartmann. This is from Chapter 3, Hunters in Our Schools and Offices, The Origin of ADHD. The earliest theories about attention deficit disorder characterized it as a diseased state that had to do with brain damage or dysfunction. At various times, it has been lumped in with fetal alcohol syndrome, mental retardation, various genetic mental illnesses, psychiatric disorders resulting from early trauma or childhood abuse, and the theory that parental smoking led to fetal oxygen deprivation. Prior to the 1970s, when ADHD was first characterized as a specific disorder, ADHD children and adults were largely treated simply as bad people, even though attentional deficits have been recognized in the psychological literature since 1905. They were the kids who always got into trouble, the James Deans of the world, the rootless and unsettled adults like Abraham Lincoln's father, the Lone Ranger, or John Dillinger. More recent research, however, has demonstrated a high incidence of ADHD among the parents of ADHD kids. This discovery caused some psychologists to initially postulate that ADHD was the result of growing up in a dysfunctional family. They suggested that ADHD may follow the same pattern as child or spousal abuse, moving through generations as learned behavior. The dietary-causing advocates contended that children's pattern their parents' eating habits, and this accounts for the generational patterns of ADHD. Other studies suggest that, like Down syndrome or muscular dystrophy, ADHD is a genetic disease, and a specific gene, the A1 variant of the D2 dopamine receptor gene, has been identified by scientists as the leading candidate. But if ADHD is a genetic disease or an abnormality, it's a popular one, possibly afflicting as many as 25 million individuals in the United States. Some estimates put ADHD as occurring in 20% of males and 5% of females. Other estimates are much lower, hitting a bottom of 3% of males and 0.5% of females. With such a wide distribution among our population, is it reasonable to assume that ADHD is simply a quirk, that it's some sort of aberration caused by defective genes or child abuse? When the condition is so widely distributed, inevitable questions arise. Why? Where did ADHD come from? The answer is, people with ADHD are the leftover hunters, those whose ancestors evolved and matured thousands of years in the past in hunting societies. There is ample precedent for genetic diseases, in quotes, that in fact represent evolutionary survival strategies. Sickle cell anemia, for example, is now known to make its victims less susceptible to malaria. When living in the jungles of Africa, where malaria is endemic, it was a powerful environmental tool against death by disease. In the malaria-free environment of North America, it became a liability. The same is true of Tay-Sachs disease, a genetic condition that hits mainly Eastern European Jews and confers on them a relative immunity to tuberculosis. And even cystic fibrosis, the deadly genetic disease common among Caucasians, 1 in 25 white Americans carries the gene, may represent a genetic adaptation. Recent research indicates the cystic fibrosis gene helps protect its victims at younger ages from death by such diarrheal diseases as cholera, which periodically swept Europe thousands of years ago. It's not so unusual, apparently, for humans to have built into our genetic material protection against local diseases and other environmental conditions. Certainly, Darwin's theory of natural selection argues in favor of such bodily defenses. Those individuals with immunities would survive to procreate and pass along their genetic material. As the human race moved from its earliest ancestors, two basic types of cultures evolved. In the areas that were lush with plant and animal life and had low human population density, hunters and gatherers predominated. In other parts of the world, particularly Asia, farming or agricultural societies evolved. Be it pursuing buffalo in North America, hunting deer in Europe, chasing wildebeest in Africa, or picking fish from a stream in Asia, these hunters needed a certain set of physical and mental characteristics to be successful. Number one, they constantly monitor their environment. That rustle in the bushes could be a lion or a coiled snake. Failure to be fully aware of the environment and notice that faint sound might mean a swift and painful death. Or that sound or flash of movement might be the animal the hunter was stalking, and noticing it would mean the difference between a full belly and hunger. I've walked through forests and jungles with modern hunter types in the United States, Europe, Australia, and East Africa, and one characteristic always struck me. They notice everything. A flipped-over stone, a tiny footprint, a distant sound, an odd smell in the air, the direction in which flowers point or moss grows. All these things have meaning to hunters, and even when walking quickly, they notice everything. Number two, they can totally throw themselves into the hunt. Time is elastic for them. Another characteristic of a good hunter is the ability to totally focus on the moment, utterly abandoning all consideration of any other time or place. When the hunter sees the prey, he gives chase through gully or ravine, over fields or through trees, giving no thought to the events of the day before, nor not considering the future, simply living totally in that one pure moment and immersing himself in it. When involved in the hunt, time seems to speed. When not in the hunt, time becomes slow. While a hunter's ability to concentrate in general may be low, his ability to utterly throw himself into the hunt at the moment is astonishing. 3, they're flexible, capable of changing strategy on a moment's notice. If the wild boar vanishes into the brush and a rabbit appears, the hunter is off in a new direction. The book ADHD, A Hunter in a Farmer's World by Thom Hartmann.
Coming up in the science revolution is Mad King Trump deciding which states will live and which states will die. Associate Professor of Economics Pavlina Cherneva is here to talk about what would FDR do about COVID-19. The last Democratic governor of Alabama, Don Siegelman, drops by to talk about how prisons are handling the coronavirus and what they should do. In Geeky Science, attorney and regulatory policy advocate with Public Citizen Amit Narang is here, asking why Trump is fighting clean car standards instead of the coronavirus. Check it all out wherever fine podcasts are available.
So every 5 years, the U.S. Department of Agriculture comes out with new guidelines, and we just put up a video over at ThomHartmann.com for supporters of our program.
First time, I want to thank you so much for all the brunches with Bernie over the years. They were great. What I'd really like to talk about is this hydrochloroquine that they are going to try out 3,000 cases in a Detroit hospital. And then also I have read that there is a genetic recessive trait that's carried in males, mostly black males and males of Mediterranean heritage, that makes the hydrochloroquine potentially lethal to those people. And I don't know if you know anything about that.
This is the people who get heart attacks from it?
Yes, heart attacks and also septicemia.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know the specifics about that genetic trait, but I have seen it referenced in news articles. I think it's really a shame that Donald Trump has inserted himself into science. The guy is not a scientist. He doesn't know anything about science. He's a science denier. He denies climate change. It's obscene. And it's equally obscene, Sandy, and thank you for the call. It's equally obscene that the networks are carrying 2-3 hours of him every afternoon. I am so sick of this. I have to leave the room when he comes on. I have reached the point now where when I hear this man's voice, I get physically ill. I tighten up. This is the man who's responsible for the death of over 13,000 of my fellow Americans because he lied, because he tried to hustle us, and now he's trying to say, oh, but don't worry, it's not so bad. There's a cure. And it's just, it's beyond obscene. I don't know how to say it beyond that. Carol in Monessen, Pennsylvania. Hey, Carol, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. Can you hear me okay?
I can, yes. Thank you.
Okay. My husband and I just heard something. This isn't exactly why I called, but it's interesting. We were listening to PBS out of Pittsburgh, and they were saying that there was a reporter who was working on these things like the Ebola outbreak and all these other outbreaks, and he predicted that in 2018 that we would have a coronavirus outbreak in the United States in 2020, and the only thing he got wrong was he said that it would originate in Chicago. I found that very interesting.
Yeah, Bill Gates predicted this in 2015. But the more alarming thing is that the reports that we're seeing in the news now are that the defense, the spy agencies, literally using satellite photographs of what was going on in Wuhan, and using spies that they had on the ground in Wuhan, were reporting in November that there was an outbreak of something that looked like SARS going on in Wuhan, reporting this to the Defense Department, reporting this to the executive office. Now, whether Trump saw these reports or not is still up in the air, but the Pentagon certainly saw these reports. And if he was told about it and he ignored it and he lied to us for months, then this man is complicit, explicitly complicit, in the deaths of 13,000 Americans and many more to come. And if he didn't know about it, then his incompetence makes him complicit. So I'm with you, Carol. I'm horrified by this. George in Portland. Hey, George, what's up?
Hey, Tom, I think you really answered it just before the break. I'm a small business owner in Portland here, Oregon, and I went to the banks. You know, I got in there early on to try to get the Paycheck Protection Program going for my employees, and I was basically told that it was on hold. They've just received a flood of too many applications. So I'd love to hear from your listeners. Has anyone, an actual small business owner, been able to take advantage of it, or has anyone seen their $1,200 check? Has anyone seen anything from this government?
Yeah, well, I don't think anybody's seen a $1,200 check yet. It's going to be another week or two before they said that they would have them available. That was going to be mid-April, but we're not applying, so I can't tell you from personal experience. But sure, we'll toss that out there, George. If anybody listening, has heard anything, give us a shout. Well, right now it's probably going to be difficult because the show's going to be over in 15 minutes and every line is full. But you can call tomorrow or on Friday. Thanks a lot for the call, George. John in Langley, Washington, in Langley,
I want to
Washington.
express gratitude. I want to express gratitude for 2 cycles of Bernie changing the country. I want to express gratitude for your show. And the whole show seems about money. I have addicts in my family. That man made me cry. Don't make me cry. But I had enough money to bail out people, and there's a difference. And then there's the person about the zoonotic diseases. I have a degree in zoology. Zoonotic is what they taught me. Mm-hmm. This is time for another Upton Sinclair talking about the slaughterhouses, but this time it's about a zoonotic disease. Then also, we're talking about all the pain of the people on this fictional money that it's a full faith and credit of us, and it's private banks that are constricting our monetary. We constantly are being told, Tom, we're constantly being told, how are you going to pay for that? How are you going to pay for that? Medicare for all. I'm sick. And without Medicare, I would be bankrupt. So this whole concept of money taking control and the austerity, I'm trying to express gratitude for the good things like Bernie, your show, which is like a constitutional assembly of the people, so we can talk about these issues and let the people know this money thing is a fictional thing that's controlled by private banks. Wrap your head around that. All this pain of our country is caused by private banks.
Although the simple fact is, John, that the amount of money that private banks can create, because money is created when money is lent. And when money is paid back, the money supply contracts. It expands and contracts based on these things. But the terms of that expansion and contraction that are done by the private banks, how wide they can expand things, how small they can contract them, and the incentives to them to do so are defined by the Fed. So it's not like, J.P. Morgan Chase and Wells Fargo are sitting around saying, let's move the money supply to this. It really is the Fed. John, thank you for your kind words. I get your comment, your concerns. Patrick in Seaside, California. Hey, Patrick, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I wanted to end my comments by saying why, as a Bernie Sanders supporter, I am going to be voting for Biden in November, but I wanted to talk about first really quickly COVID-19 and Republicans. Yesterday's criminal debacle in the Wisconsin primary, and everyone, I think, who dies from COVID-19 should be considered one count of negligent homicide brought against Trump, the governors of Florida and Georgia, Fox News, Rush Limbaugh, the Republican state legislators, and the conservative Supreme Court justices in Wisconsin. And these charges should be brought in criminal and civil court.
I'm with you, and I would add Robin Vos, the head Republican in Washington, to that list, or in Wisconsin.
And all the cases total. So if it's 250,000 cases, and Trump thinks that's a good number, that's 250,000 counts of negligent homicide against Trump. And if there's 50 million total cases, that's 50 million counts of criminal negligence and reckless endangerment. Now, as far as voting for Biden, And we all need to vote. It's like Tim Lincecum said for the Giants, you play for the name on the front of your jersey, not the name on the back. You play for the guy sitting next to you. We have to vote for each other because my vote might replace your stolen, suppressed, or thrown out vote and vice versa. And we need to overwhelm the polls like the zombies in World War Z looking for Republican brains. We have to overwhelm the Trump voter turnout. Now, I absolutely loathe and despise Joe Biden, but I'm voting for him anyway, knowing full well that he's a corporate whore, a raging mediocrity. He's probably more senile than Trump. But
yeah, Patrick, I'm going to stop that right there. You know, damning with faint praise is not useful. Tom in Panama City, Florida. Hey, Tom, what's up?
Yeah, Tom, I'd like to touch on something no one seems to be talking about. You know, we had Hurricane Michael that devastated our area down here, and now we've got COVID-19, which has closed most of the businesses. MREs, after Hurricane Michael, you know, they
Meals
were
ready to eat.
They were, yeah, Meals Ready to Eat, correct. Yeah. And we've got single mothers now with children that have no jobs, no income. The kids are going hungry. And I don't know if you've heard of anything.
So you're suggesting that, like, after hurricanes, they should be coming in with MREs, meals ready to eat, and passing these things out? Maybe Trump could go down and throw some toilet paper rolls or paper towel rolls at people?
I can't eat paper rolls, but I even called the governor and got one of the minions finally, and I got the typical answer from a politician, we'll look into it. But, you know, I mean, there's literally children up here, you know, in the rural areas of the Panhandle, single mothers with children, and they don't have any food.
Yeah, and with school out, I mean, some schools have figured out ways to. Thank you, Tom. Some schools have figured out ways to get food, you know, the breakfasts and lunches to their kids, but others have not. And so you've got kids all over America where their principal source of food was school, and that's not available to them. Tom has identified a very, very real problem. I'm not hearing a word about it.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
You know, surprise, surprise. Trump doesn't care about kids. Well, yeah, of course. We'll be back. It's 45 minutes past. And welcome back. John in Los Angeles. Hey, John, what's up?
Hey, Tom, how you doing? I appreciate all the stuff that you've done. Today is just a real, it's a bummer because I look at it from the fact that I am an African American. We are already getting crushed. I mean, even right here in L.A., as I was talking to the lady, ambulances going by, they're pulling people off the streets, dead. The coronavirus is killing more black people than any other. I mean, really, this and then with the failure of the election, just this is going to be a very bad set of years for my people. Yeah. We're about to die by the hundreds of thousands. It doesn't make no sense to even vote. We just need to prepare for the worst because there's no way to stop this. And climate change, we've already passed 3 points of no return. The next point that we're scheduled to hit, it is actually in 2022. When we hit that point, close your eyes and imagine.
Yeah. Yeah, and that logarithmic explosion of problems that we're seeing, you know, of infections that we're seeing with coronavirus, they're predicting the same sort of logarithmic expansion increase in severe weather and other problems associated with climate change. Back to you, John.
Do you know what else? I found out about that logarithmic problem? That opens up a whole new can of worms pestilence that will be coming.
Yes.
These are brand new, never seen before from climate change. If these stuff
There's a locust
reanimated,
swarm crossing northeast Africa right now. You've got several countries that their crops are being wiped out by locusts.
Whoever heard of a swarm 40 miles in diameter?
Yep.
That's what's crossing Africa. And between that and these new diseases, and what people don't know is when a germ of any kind, bacterial or virus, is frozen in ice water, such as the tundra, it stops animating. The minute that sucker gets thawed, it gets released. It reanimates.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, we've seen this with, I think it was reindeer that were 15,000 years old that died of anthrax. And when they melted when the tundra melted in northern Siberia because of the global warming, and the people discovered these dead reindeer, the people who discovered the reindeer died of anthrax poisoning.
Exactly. This is a problem.
Yeah. To say the very, very least, it is absolutely a problem. John, thanks a lot for pointing it out. And it's like, yeah. And frankly, I'm wondering and speculating, I'll say that right up front, that the coronavirus may well be in our population now because of climate change as well. I mean, why did those bats come into contact with humans or the pangolins? Hey, did you know that Hillary Clinton actually won Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, North Carolina, and Florida in the 2016 election? It's on page 92 of my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Heather in Las Vegas. Hey, Heather, what's on your mind today?
Hi. My biggest question I have, I was born and raised in Flint, Michigan. I still have tons of family back there, so fellow Michigander. But I have friends and family that are getting these 1-hour tests in Flint and Saginaw and Detroit, and they're sick, but they're coming back and being told that they're negative. But out here, where I live in Las Vegas, we've only tested 17,000 people total, and we only got 150 tests this week. So There's a huge difference, and those test results take anywhere from 7 to 14 days to come back. So why is it that Michigan is the state that's picked, but everybody's being told, no, it's negative, don't worry, go home and don't worry about it?
Because Michigan's governor was able to negotiate with one of the companies that are providing these tests, and Nevada's governor apparently didn't. Is a short answer.
My concern
I don't know who your governor is.
But my concern is that can we trust these tests? Because, they didn't tell anybody about the Flint water for years. Yeah. They didn't tell anybody about that's still not fixed. There's a lot of stuff that goes on, and like the previous caller mentioned, they want to test that pill in a Detroit hospital. So it's like, is this just a giant test case, and can we trust it?
Heather, I completely understand your lack of confidence or faith or trust in the system that literally poisoned people in Flint and lied about it for several years, and the Republican governor of Michigan who oversaw this entire process never even went to jail. I completely get that. I'm not so concerned, though, about the tests not being accurate. There's always going to be a few, false tests, false negatives and false positives. I'm far more concerned about the availability of them and the fact that it's taking a week to 2 weeks to get the results back. That is absolutely criminal and, just should not be done. Heather, thanks for the call. Jane in Manny, Louisiana. Am I saying that right, Jane?
Yes, that's correct. How are you today?
What's up? I'm fine.
First of all, I would like you to read Ecclesiastes in the Bible. There's nothing new under the sun, sir. and Genesis 3, which says that God created the heavens and the earth in that day and made light and dark. Secondly, Trump wants to save lives. He's doing a fantastic job. I'm in Louisiana.
Jane, if Trump wants to save lives, why did he lie to us for 3 months?
Excuse me, I'm talking.
Okay, you're not talking anymore, Jane. Yeah. Lisa in Seattle. Hey, Lisa, what's on your mind?
Yes. Thank you. I have one thing is I'm very angry at Trump. You know, I didn't vote for him in the begin with. I didn't vote for him, and he never will get my vote. But the main thing I'm calling about is this time is regards to the animals. Because I've gotten a thing from both Petco. I have a kitty cat, and he's wonderful. And Mom has a dog, and he's wonderful. And, you know, we have and Mom and I are both avid animal fans. I do occasionally eat. I do eat meat, but I try to be conscientious about it. But then I eat lots of vegetables also. But my concern is that I got a email from both Petco and from the University of Washington Medical Center about the myths, and they're saying that animals, in fact, do not have to worry about getting it. You know, they said that pet owners should feel at ease.
There is some very, very small
not
evidence, Lisa. Yeah, forgive my interrupting. We're almost out of time here. There's some very, very small, a couple of anecdotal cases of cats getting this. There was one case out of Hong Kong of a dog. But the simple reality is that there's really no solid evidence that our pets are going to get this disease. And anybody who's thinking about dumping their pets or whatever because they're afraid of either giving it to them or getting it from them is just wrong. You know, take care of your pets. I'm with you, Lisa. Thank you. Felicia in Lapeer, Michigan, near Flint. What's up? Flint just got invoked.
Hi, Tom. Felicia. Thank you so much for what you do. You give us hope, especially in the arena of accountability that you mentioned earlier today. But in lessons to be learned from President Cuomo, chuckle, briefing this morning, he had a slide that said, why are more African American and Latinos affected by this disease? And in New York State, Latinos are the top group or largest group of deaths in New York State. His slide showed 34% of deaths in New York State are Latinos, and they comprise 29% of the population. Blacks are 28% of deaths in New York State, with a population of 22% of the population. Whites are 27% of deaths. 32 and whites represent 32% of the population. Asians are 7% of deaths, and they are 14% of the population. Other is 4% of deaths with 3% of population.
So what's your point, Felicia?
President Cuomo said poorest people pay the highest price.
Right. Yeah. When it rains, poor people get wetter. When it's cold, poor people get colder. I mean, it's just all of the vicissitudes of life, all of the difficulties that we encounter are far more difficult for poor people and people who have historically been discriminated against and marginalized. And that's what we're seeing right now. We are seeing the results of a 60, 80 year
And there's the data
effort.
with the Latinos and the blacks and so on.
Yeah. Thank you, Felicia. I thank you very much. We are seeing now the result of those white Southerners who, since the 60s, since LBJ rolled out Medicare and Medicaid, said you cannot expand Medicaid to our people because there's a lot of black people down here in the South, and they said that these white racists did not want those people, the African American population in the South, to have health care. It's obscene, and we're seeing it writ large. Anyhow, we'll see you tomorrow. Reach out to your friends and tell them where to find Progressive Media. Tag You're It. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.